Hello, everyone. Welcome to the time and day of our Boise City Council regular meeting. The mayor will be joining us again at about 6:15, so we're going to go ahead and get the meeting started without her. The first and second items on our agenda are the invocation, which we mark with a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The next item is roll call. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Agent.
Here.
Clegg.
Here.
Halliburton.
Here.
Willits.
Here.
Whittings.
Here.
All present.
The next item on our agenda is request for approval of the city council minutes from the work session and regular meeting of January 31st.
Madam Mayor, I request approval of the minutes for the January 31st meeting at 4:30 p.m. and at 6 p.m.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Willits.
Here. Yes.
Whittings.
Yes.
Agent.
Yes.
Clegg.
Yes.
Halliburton.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Item 5 is special business, and we don't have any business scheduled. And so we move on to item 6 on the agenda, which is the consent agenda. All items with an asterisk are considered to be routine by the council and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless a council member or citizen so requests, in which case the item will be removed from the general order of business and considered in its normal sequence.
Madam Mayor, I move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Willits.
Yes.
Whittings.
Yes.
Agent.
Yes.
Clegg.
Yes.
Halliburton.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is item 7, ordinances, and we have one ordinance on first reading.
Madam Mayor, I ask unanimous consent that all ordinances on the first reading be read by number and title only and filed for the second reading calendar.
Without objection?
ORD 6-23, an ordinance CAR 21-00035 for property located at 5727 Hill Road, annexing 3.825 acres of certain lands and territory situated in Ada County, Idaho, adjacent and contiguous to the corporate limits of the city of Boise City, establishing and determining the land use classification of said 3.8 acres as R-1B, single-family residential, 4.8 units per acre, setting forth a reasoned statement in support of such annexation and zone change, directing the city engineer to lodge and file a legal description and map for said annexed lands and territory, providing that copies of this ordinance shall be filed with the Ada County Auditor, the Ada County Treasurer, the Ada County Assessor, the Ada County Recorder, and the Idaho State Tax Commission. Providing that a copy of said legal description and map of said annexed lands and territory be recorded with the Ada County Recorder and filed with the Ada County Assessor and Idaho State Tax Commission as required by law, and providing an effective date.
Thank you. We have one item on second reading.
Madam Mayor, I ask unanimous consent that all ordinances on the second reading calendar be read by number and title only and filed for the third reading calendar.
Without objection?
ORD 5-23, an ordinance CAR 22-00017 for property located at 7735 West Victory Road, annexing approximately 7.8 acres of certain lands and territory situated in Ada County, Idaho, adjacent and contiguous to the corporate limits of the city of Boise City, establishing and determining the land use classification of said 7.8 acres as R-1C, single-family residential, 8 units per acre, setting forth a reasoned statement in support of such annexation and zone change, directing the city engineer to lodge and file a legal description and map for said annexed lands and territory, providing that copies of this ordinance shall be filed with the Ada County Auditor, the Ada County Treasurer, the Ada County Assessor, the Ada County Recorder, and the Idaho State Tax Commission. Providing that a copy of said legal description and map of said annexed lands and territory be recorded with the Ada County Recorder and filed with the Ada County Assessor and Idaho State Tax Commission as required by law, and providing an effective date.
Thank you. And we have one ordinance on third reading.
Madam Mayor, I move the further reading of ordinance 3-23 be dispensed with and the record reflected has been read the third time in full.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Willetts,
Yes.
Whittings,
Yes.
Bajent,
Yes.
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries. ORD 3-23, an ordinance repealing Boise City Code Title 4, Chapter 4, entitled Motor Vehicle Emissions Control and providing an effective date.
Madam Mayor, I move that ordinance 3-23 be approved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Willetts,
Yes.
Whittings,
Yes.
Bajent,
Yes.
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
And we have one item on first, second, and third reading.
Madam Mayor, I move that all rules of the council interfering with the immediate consideration of ordinance 7-23 be suspended, that the portions of Idaho Code 50-902 requiring an ordinance to be read on 3 different days, twice in title and once in full, be dispensed with, and record show that it has been read the 3rd time in full.
There a second?
Second. Second.
Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Willetts,
Yes.
Whittings,
Yes.
Bajent,
Yes.
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries. ORD 7-23, an ordinance describing the exterior boundaries and annexing, incorporating the Ustick Ditch lateral into the Boise Municipal Irrigation System, providing for the ownership of ditch facilities and operation of the lateral ditch by the City of Boise City Public Works Department, directing the Boise City Clerk to record a certified copy of this ordinance in the office of the Ada County Recorder, providing for a waiver of the reading rules and providing an effective date.
Madam Mayor, I move that ordinance 7-23 be approved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Willetts,
Yes.
Whittings,
Yes.
Bajent,
Yes.
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
All right. I was hoping that was going to take us longer so that I could rescind control of this meeting, but it didn't. So we're going to move on to new business. We have 3 items on the public hearing calendar. The first one is the amended FY 2023 Development Impact Fee hearing. And here to do the presentation, we have Travis Black. Welcome, Travis.
Thank you. So as you mentioned, here to talk about a small update. Sorry, technical problems. Small update to the impact fee plan, changing fees, basically moving some fees and some people from North River to Southeast Barber Valley. Just to give folks background on that. So about a year ago, we updated our entire parks, police and fire impact fee plans. As part of that, the Barber Valley Neighborhood Association asked why we were crediting fees collected in Harris North to North River rather than Southeast, which was closer geographically. So we were tasked with looking into this. And so this hearing today is to hear the outcome of that investigation and the suggested fee changes resulting from that. So and I apologize that it's a little bit difficult to see on the screen, but the cross-hatched area that's called out as area to credit to Southeast Barber Valley, that's the area we're talking about. It currently really all it includes is Harris North. The area is Pravada, Hermosa Hills. That stuff is already in Southeast Barber Valley. So it's just really at this point, it would only include the new development in Harris North. So quickly, just to kind of get to the punchline is, so basically all lands that are in the foothills fall into the North River Park planning area. Oftentimes that makes sense because for much of that land, the foothills functions as a connector over the top of it. For example, even though the north and east ends aren't necessarily contiguous, they're effectively joined by the military reserve. However, when you look at Harris North, that's really not the case, as there's no trail system that currently exists to connect them to the rest of the North River Park system or trail system. And as a matter of fact, if they just want to leave their neighborhood, they have to go through Southeast Barber Valley. So just from a proximity perspective, it made a lot of sense to reevaluate where we credited those fees. So our next step was we started looking at how do we actually change the park planning area to be able to accommodate this so that Harris North would fall in to the Southeast Barber Valley. We quickly found out that amending the parks comp plan is a multi-year process. That's going to happen in a couple of years anyway. And so the conclusion was, let's just change the attribution of the fees that we collect in the area, as opposed to changing the park planning area at this boundary at this time. So we'll revisit the change of the boundary when we do the parks comp plan in a couple of years. But for now, the most expedient solution was just to start crediting the fees from Harris North to Southeast Barber Valley rather than North River. So again, here's the map just showing exactly what the areas that we're talking about. So as I mentioned, we're not talking about changing the boundary. We're just talking about changing the attribution of the fees. So one is going forward, we're going to be crediting fees that we collect, not to North River, but to Southeast Barber Valley. But the second part of that is fees that we've already collected. To date, there's been somewhere around 150 permits issued in that area and collections of just over $200,000. So the proposal would be change the attribution of the fees and also transfer that money that we collected previously that went to North River into the Southeast Barber Valley park planning area so that they have the benefit of that development that's already occurred in Harris North. So just to quickly better understand the changes that result from each component individually. So one is there's future growth, which is the expected population growth in both park planning areas, which is one of the things that we base our impact fee plan on and the fees in that plan. And so effectively, based on what Compass has told us, we're moving 222 people effectively from North River into the Southeast Barber Valley. And so as a result of that, we need to change the fees that we're collecting per person to make sure we collect the adequate amount over the life or over the 10-year projected period. Again, I won't bore you too much with the math that I could enjoy talking about for a while, but effectively you have the numerator, which is the total dollars that we need for Southeast Parks. And then in the denominator, you have the number of people that we have to collect it over. So in this example here, again, looking solely at the change of future growth and population, you're keeping the numerator, the dollars, the same. You're just changing the people. And so as a result, you see in the lower right-hand corner up there, the fees on a per person basis would need to increase in North River, decrease in Southeast. And that's again, because you're getting fewer people in North River, so more fees per person, and the opposite is true in Southeast. Looking at the other impact from this change is the transfer of the funds. This is actually just looking at this individual piece again. This is actually the opposite of what we were talking about before, where the people here aren't changing. The denominator isn't changing. It's the numerator, the total dollars that we need to collect over the 10-year projected period. And when we're doing the impact fee plan, thing about it is the amount that we put in that numerator, the total dollars to be collected was based on the 10-year impact fee eligible capital plan less whatever the starting balance was. And so this affects that. It doesn't affect the plan, the dollars spent on projects. It just affects the starting balance. And so by reducing the starting balance in North River, increasing it in Southeast, again, in the lower right-hand corner, you see North River needs to collect a little bit more fees, and Southeast Barber Valley needs to collect a little bit less fees. So in conclusion, both of these changes, both the population-driven ones and the fund balance-driven ones, work synergistically. They both move in the same direction. So even though each change individually was only 4, 5, 6, 7%, collectively they result in the fee change per person that are shown up there. So in North River, fees would go up 12.4%. In Southeast, they'd go down 10%. And again, this is on a per person basis, and that's what's used to calculate the fee based on the dwelling unit size. And again, I know that one of the reasons why the neighborhood association asked about this change was so that they could collect more fees faster. And so it seems somewhat counterintuitive to lower the fees in the area that they wanted more fees. However, that $205,000 that is being transferred from North River is effectively giving them 500 medium-sized homes day one. This is just the schedule of fees on top of what they are currently, and then on the bottom is what they would what we'd propose. Again, going back to this, the percentage changes hold true for this table, just the dollar figures are different because there's different number of people in each sized home. Likewise, this is what would happen in the Southeast Barber Valley. I'm not going to run through it all. It's in the ordinance, but I would stand for any questions.
Nope. All right. Looks like there are no questions.
Tough audience.
Oh, wait, Councilmember Willis, did you? Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Council President. So now that there are no questions for staff, we're going to move into the public hearing. Looks like we've got one person, Rob Stark. Come on up. Is anybody online for this item? If you're here online to testify on this, just raise your Zoom hand and we'll call you. Is anybody else here for this one? All right, go ahead.
Right, Rob Stark, Vice President, Barber Valley Neighborhood Association, 6865 East Warm Springs. Madam Mayor, Madam President, council members, we'd like to start by thanking Travis, Eric, and staff for all the work that went into this change to make the Southeast Barber Valley Parks Planning District whole. We'd also like to thank Travis for always keeping us informed of the status and taking the time to explain a lot of how this works and the details. He was very patient. Also like to thank the DIFAC members for all wanting to make sure that not just Harris North, but other future developments such as Harris East would be included. Finally, we'd like to thank council, particularly Councilmember Clegg, for directing Travis and staff to make these corrections once the oversight was brought to your attention. BVNA supports the ordinance and the eventual modification of the Parks Planning District boundaries. However, we would humbly request that rather than lowering the park's impact fees for Southeast Barber Valley, instead increase the budget for Southeast Barber Valley Parks Capital Improvement Plan by the $205,262 and put these funds towards starting construction on the long-awaited and sorely needed Alta Harris Park. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Stark? Right. Thank you very much. Anybody online? Any further questions for staff?
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I guess I would ask the question, if we wanted to do what the Barber Valley Neighborhood Association requested, there would still be a decrease, but it would be a smaller one. It would just be the denominator and not the numerator. Is that, am I?
That's correct. Sorry, Madam Mayor, council member. That's correct. And it gets a little bit trickier still because since we just did that the updated impact fee plan. It's the question of just reevaluating the cost for one project without looking at all the projects, especially for parks in its totality, and just singling out the one park, again, that we still don't have firm bids or anything like that on. So it just seemed like this was, again, the more expedient route. And I would anticipate that we're updating costs across the board over the next couple of years, as opposed to waiting for 5 or 6 years like we did last time.
Thank you. That makes sense.
With that, I will close the public hearing.
Madam Mayor, I would move that we adopt ORD 8-23, an ordinance amending Title IX, Chapter 2 of the Development Impact Fee.
Second.
Madam Mayor, isn't it true that we have to move it to first reading and then ask for it to be read the first time?
Oh,
Yeah, so what we actually, I believe, need a motion as such to move it to first reading. It can be read tonight.
okay.
Well, you could make a motion to read it for the first time tonight.
Let's do that. Madam Mayor, I move that we move ORD 8-23 to the first reading calendar.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Madam Mayor?
Yeah.
I just want to further compliment Travis for really sticking with this. I know that it was a really sticky wicket to try to peel back, how far you need to go and what the best approach was. But like Rob pointed out, he kept us apprised every step of the way also. And so it brought us to this point where we can make this Parks Improvement District whole. And hopefully we can get started on Alta Harris soon, Rob. Our eyes on it. Thank
Madam
you.
Mayor. Also like to thank Travis. I know this was a lot of work and I appreciate it. To the comments from the neighborhood, I guess I would say that it makes more sense to me. I agree to adjust the impact fees across the board based on the needs that we're seeing in the increased construction costs, rather than trying to peel this one off separately. And while I won't be there, look forward to seeing that come forward soon.
All right, clerk, will you call the roll? I believe that you call the roll and then you'll read it for the first time. Great.
Willetts,
Yes.
Whittings,
Yes.
Bajent,
Yes.
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries. ORD 8-23, an ordinance amending Title IX, Chapter 2, Development Impact Fee, Section 7, 12B, and 13 of Boise City Code. This amendment updates the attribution of certain local park impact fees, development impact fees per service unit, assessment and payment of development impact fees, and providing an effective date of April 10th, 2023.
Thank you. And so this will move to second reading for our next council meeting. And so we'll move on to the next item, PUD 22-60, the East End Neighborhood Association appeal at 801 East Reserve Street. So for this one, we'll start with, welcome, David, staff presenter, then we'll hear from the appellant, the East End Neighborhood Association, and then the applicant, Dustin Holt. Dustin, hi. Okay, so then we'll hear from you and your team, and then we'll hear from the public. I've got a couple folks that are signed up, and if you didn't sign up but plan to testify, you can let me know after, and I'll just ask you to sit in the front row. And then if you're online for this one, please raise your hand and we'll call you after we've heard from folks that are here in person. And with that, David, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. On December 12th, the Planning and Zoning Commission approved the conditional use for a planned mixed-use development comprised of 206 dwelling units and a height exception on 4.78 acres located at 801 East Reserve Street in a C2D DA zone and a C2 DA zone. On December 21st, the East End Neighborhood Association appealed the Planning and Zoning Commission approval. And as you can see from the aerial photograph here, the property is located on the south side of Reserve Street and is directly adjacent to the residential neighborhood to the east and south. This neighborhood contains a mix of single-family, townhouses, and apartment facilities. Adjacent to the west is a fire station, which the property shares an access point with onto Reserve Street. And across Reserve to the north is Fort Boise and the Military Reserve Open Space Area. The development is comprised of 4 buildings. This includes the original Armory building, which is listed on the National Registry of Historic Places, a large 4-story mixed-use building on the east side, right here, and 2 3-story townhouses along style apartments along Logan Street. Also, a height exception was requested since the elevator towers for the larger 4-story building exceed the height of the zone by a few feet. The applicant is proposing a phased project, which includes the construction of the 4-story mixed-use building and the townhouse style apartments along Logan Street as phase 1. The large mixed-use building and townhouse apartments will contain 206 dwelling units and approximately 3,000 square feet of commercial space at the intersection of Avenue H and Reserve, as you can see up here. The parking for the project will be primarily located within a parking garage, which also includes below-ground parking, whereas phase 2 of the project includes tenant improvements to the Armory. However, no particular tenants or uses have been specified or specifically identified with the Armory at this time. Additionally, a recorded DA does prohibit more intensive and auto-centric uses from the site. Also, I would note that the site is located in a neighborhood activity center, and it is close to downtown. Therefore, higher densities and more intensive uses are anticipated. These elevations show the project design and how the apartment units will address Avenue H and Logan Street. In addition, the mixed-use portion of the building is located at the intersection of Avenue H and Reserve. And please note the project design breaks the overall mass of the building into 2 structures along Avenue H, as seen here, to help reduce the mass and its impacts. Also, the height exception is required because the building height exceeds the height of the zone for this elevator tower here and this one here by a few feet. The planning team has received public comments expressing concerns to the proposed development. Their concerns involve the following points: traffic, parking, general compatibility of the project in terms of density and building mass, and the preservation of the historic Armory building. These concerns generally form the basis of the grounds of the appeal. The 3 grounds for the appeal are listed here and include: first, preservation of the historic site or historic Armory building. The subject property is not located within historic overlay and is not recognized on the official landmarks. It is listed on the National Registry of Historic Places, but this listing offers no protection under Boise City Development Code. Therefore, there are no required historic protections for the subject property. However, the property and the historic building are protected by the 2012 Recorded Development Agreement, which prohibits several autocentric uses from the site, and also conceptually detail how the Armory building will be redeveloped. These controls on the future development of the Armory building are sufficient to protect the historic building. Second ground was that it is not consistent with the future neighborhood activity center or the neighborhood, since it doesn't identify the specific commercial uses within the Armory. As noted previously, the proposed commercial development within the Armory building will comply with the development agreement and the Boise City Development Code. These controls in the future development of the Armory building are sufficient to ensure that the proposed commercial development integrates with the future neighborhood activity center and the surrounding neighborhood. Therefore, identifying the specific commercial uses for the Armory building with this application or further restricting the allowed uses within the DA are not necessary. Also, the nature and composition of the uses within a neighborhood activity center are only conceptually identified within the comprehensive plan, and the proposed project complies with these. The third grounds is that the planning and zoning decision was capricious. Boise City Development Code specifically states that the decision cannot be considered capricious if the following has occurred, and to state code where there is room for, or the city code, where there is room for 2 options, actions are not arbitrary and capricious when exercised honestly and upon due consideration. During the hearing, the commission questioned the applicant, the East End Neighborhood Association, the planning team on a number of these issues. These issues include traffic impacts, the recorded development agreement, the project's compatibility, it's with the overall neighborhood, the proposed street improvements, the commercial redevelopment of the site, the protection of the historic building, parking, I could go on. Therefore, it is evident that the commission discussed and considered these topics during the hearing. So in conclusion, the planning team recommends denial of the appeal and uphold the commission's decision. And as demonstrated in the appeal memorandum from the city staff, the commission did not err in their decision. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Mosier?
Madam Mayor.
I'm going to go with the council president pro tem and then Councilmember Clegg.
I think Council President Clegg beat me, but we might be asking the same question or related question. If the Armory building itself was designated as a landmark, would that change what would be allowed to be proposed in the site next to it, the development that's next to it?
Madam Mayor, Council Pro Tem Halliburton, I don't think the landmark designation would protect the overall site. It will protect the Armory itself and the building and its facade and the development of it, but I don't think it would prohibit this use from happening. Although I'm not a historic planner per se, and I'm not familiar with that code section.
Good enough. Thank you.
Madam Mayor. So a little bit of follow-up on that. What would it take? I believe it's an action we take to make it a landmark, if I'm not mistaken. And you referenced a development agreement when the building was sold. I remember a facade easement when the building was sold, but maybe I'm misremembering, and maybe that facade protection was in the development agreement. Could you expound on that?
Madam Mayor, Council Member Clegg, the facade, the development agreement did specify how the facade was to be developed. And I think it is specifically called, and there are designs and elevations within the development agreement that are specified there. What would it would take to protect the building and the site? I don't think the landmark designation would do that. Although the staff or the city can initiate that on its own through an application process. I believe there is a process to do that. I'd have to reach out to the historic planner for more details.
Thank you.
I believe Richard, the historic planner, might be online if you had questions for him.
Richard, if there are questions, I'll just ask that you raise your hand and then you can answer them as well. Do you want something from, would you like to hear from Richard if he's here?
Also answer that question, it'd be great.
It looks like he's here. Hello.
Hello.
There you go. We can hear you, Richard.
Okay, good.
Did you hear the council member's question? If not, council member, would you repeat it?
Yeah, the question, Richard, was what does it take to create a landmark designation for this building? Can the council initiate that, or does that have to be done by the owner?
I do believe that can be initiated by the Historic Preservation Commission. And the process is to determine that the meets certain criteria, historical criteria, and the Armory building definitely does, in my professional opinion, meet those criteria set forth in our ordinance and in the National Park Service's National Register nomination criterion, which are similar but slightly different. So it's Section 8.b of our city code in this section that is related to this historic preservation provision says that the commission on its own initiative or upon the request of the city council or upon you or upon request of the owner of property propose it to be designated. And if that happens, then there is a process that goes forward of, like I say, determining that it is worthy of landmark status, which the Armory obviously and certainly is. And then there is a process that goes through of doing the research, developing some sort of something similar to a National Register nomination form. That is the exact procedure that could happen, but there are other ways to landmark it through a city ordinance. And I won't go into all the detail because we'd be here till 10 just me talking about it, but it's a process that can occur.
Thank you, Richard. If I could ask one follow-up on that, as I understand it, the landmark designation on the historic building itself would not impact the ability to develop the lot next to it. Is that also correct?
I would have to dig deeper on this, seeing if it's an adjacent parcel that's under same ownership. The National Park Service's assessment does consider site as well as just the building itself. But the way the city ordinance is written, I'm not certain that that this development would be prohibitive. One visually thing that I see that would be the issue is those buildings that do front the street and how proximate they are to the building. But the other building, I mean, that's just getting into the minutia of things. But I'm thinking that side development parcel probably could be developed if it were landmarked. Another thing landmarking does is it provides for up to 180-day, usually demolition or rehabilitation delay, so that assessments can be made about the impact of the building. But the site question, I haven't dug in deep enough to know exactly if the adjacent sites are considered. But there would be, I'm not sure what the parcel is that would be landmarked.
You.
Madam Mayor, can I ask a quick follow-up question there? So since this piece of property isn't changing hands, if council was to initiate that, would they need consent from the property owner for it to receive that landmark designation? Or would the city do that without the consent of the owner?
I am not seeing that in the code that it is required to get consent. It says to my eyes that the property owner can initiate on their own, but so can all these other parties, is how I read that. Legal may want to look at that more deeply, because I don't have JD after my name, but I do kind of see it that way.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further? All right, thank you. And now we'll hear from the appellant. Welcome, Cindy.
Presentation, there's two documents, but they're the same. We'll just wait till my presentation pulls up. But good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the council. My name is Cindy Montoto. I live at 718 East McKinley Street, Boise, Idaho, 83712, and I'm the vice president of the Eastern Neighborhood Association, and I'm the authorized representative to speak to you this evening. You may know me due to my position as vice chair on the Historic Preservation Commission, but as this site does not lie in any of the historic district boundaries, this does not present a conflict. And the site does have National Register standing. So therefore, the ENA board felt that my expertise, nearly a decade of experience in historic preservation in the city of Boise, as well as my proximity to the site as an East End resident and my desire to have a successful neighborhood activity center at this site, makes me a good representative for this appeal. And before I get into my presentation, just to answer a question of the note of landmark status. It is something that can be done through Historic Preservation Commission at the recommendation of council through section 2-18-8, I believe, of City Code. And I love that that conversation is already happening. Is this the slide changer? Excellent. So first, I'd like to make it clear that ENA is not opposed to this site being developed with multifamily housing. In fact, the vision in our neighborhood plan recognizes this housing opportunity, and we look forward to having such an asset in the neighborhood, as this is likely the East End's only real opportunity for a NAC. We recognize Alpha's work in mixed-use development, but it's important to note that they've never done a NAC on a historic site. We want to ensure the success of this site as a NAC and that the Armory building is adequately protected by a specific plan detailing potential damages and all future improvements. The reason for our appeal this evening surrounds three what we feel are vital components for the success of this development that have not sufficiently been addressed in the PUD application, the staff report, the commission's decision, nor in the development agreement for this site. The East End Neighborhood Plan clearly identifies historic preservation as a key priority for the neighborhood. The plan was adopted by the city in 2017 as a tool to help the city and ENA achieve the goals outlined in Blueprint Boise. We recognize that both Blueprint Boise and the neighborhood plan are plans and are not intended to override city code. But when used together, they're designed to collaboratively determine the future of the East End while preserving and sustaining the existing neighborhood form and historic design, guiding growth, improving livability, and enhancing cultural amenities. While much of the East End is already developed, In this present time of growth, opportunities like the Armory are few and far between across the entire city. And together, all of us, Ina, the city, and Alpha, we need to ensure collaboratively that we make the effort to get this right. At this point, this has solely been left up to Alpha to do on their own. The Planning and Zoning Commission's decision to approve this application in regards to the future Neighborhood Activity Center was made solely on the basis of verbal statements made during the hearing by Alpha. These statements merely acknowledge that Alpha understands the expectation that the Armory is to be repurposed as a NAC and intends to do so. However, the application itself, as well as the development agreement, lack concrete, detailed preservation language or any plans for the Armory building or any planning for the future NAC. The DA was not included in the staff report nor presented during the hearing, yet it was referenced by staff as what assures the developer must and will create a NAC. Yet the DA also does not include any specific details or protections surrounding preservation mitigation for the site. In fact, the most specific detail in the DA regarding future development of this site as a NAC is a statement that any new development should be located towards the northeast corner of the site, something that Ina asked the developer to do since our initial meeting with them. Blueprint Boise section Neighborhood Activity Center 14.2 zoning recommends amendments to the zoning code that facilitate historic preservation and conservation of quality urban design. Inclusion of this in Blueprint Boise shows the city's awareness and dedication to historic preservation in its NACs, and this should be applied to this application. Yet, where is it? How do we know it exists if it's not on the record in writing? Let's consider Hyde Park, a commercial historic district since 1980, also listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and is a neighborhood activity center. Located more than a mile from downtown and historically having streetcar service connecting it to and from downtown, the area was a thriving commercial district from the turn of the century, providing many different retail and service uses. Hyde Park is a successful neighborhood activity center due to the city's recognition of its history of being Boise's first suburban shopping area and the protective historic preservation measures put in place by the city of Boise to ensure that it remains a thriving and successful location for businesses. On December 29th, Ina requested a formal project review of the application be conducted by the Idaho State Historic Preservation Office. The Idaho SHPO's outreach historian, Dan Everhart, conducted the review and informed Ina and Alpha of the following findings. The project will adversely affect one of the 7 aspects of integrity, which makes this property eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places, specifically the Armory's integrity of setting. The National Register defines integrity as the ability of a property to convey its significance. Integrity is a word generally used to describe a person's honesty and sincerity, but in Webster's New Dictionary, the word completeness was added to integrity's definition, and this broader explanation applies to buildings, structures, sites, and objects and their abilities to possess integrity. Additionally, the Idaho SHPO states in their analysis that, quote, the relationship of the Idaho National Guard Armory to its historic surroundings will be negatively impacted by construction of the proposed development, end quote. Thankfully, they go on to say that, quote, despite this impact, effects to the proposed development would be limited and not jeopardize the property's National Register eligibility, end quote. It's imperative to note that there are no written specific protective measures for the building or to memorialize the building anywhere in the PUD, nor in the DA. And again, per the neighborhood plan and Blueprint Boise, the need for these is overly recognized and stated. And here's the letter from the Idaho SHPO. We should have received it from staff, but I'm happy to revisit this when I stand for questions. Neighborhood activity centers are a fairly new land use and planning concept for Boise that were recently established through the adoption of Blueprint Boise. The site is an excellent opportunity for the city to develop a great NAC, one that we know Ina, the city, and Alpha want to see thrive. However, such success requires that the city work with the developer to try and ensure success. While it's never guaranteed success, we do know that following city plans and using best practice is a much better approach than simply trusting a developer to get it right. Alpha received no clear directives from the city on how to create a neighborhood activity center on a historic site, and P&Z approved an application with no directive in what the expectations are in creating them. With no plans or specifics for phase 2, the city provides no accountability to the neighborhood or our community for this future neighborhood activity center. Thus, we have no assurance that either Blueprint Boise or the neighborhood plan will be fulfilled. And without any knowledge of what this future NAC might be, how can we gauge it for potential success? The success of this critical neighborhood activity center, again, the East End's only real opportunity for one, is something the city must take incredibly seriously, and it's irresponsible to leave the planning for a NAC up to solely the developer. A responsible decision should not be made on an application or development agreement that is silent on the specifics of the neighborhood activity center and historic preservation concerns I have presented. The only concrete information the city, the public, and ENA presently have for what's to fulfill the NAC is the few things Alpha said during the hearing on the record, to which P&Z Commissioner Stead pointed towards Alpha and said, quote, "I'm at ease that the DA protects the building. We have you on the record saying some important things," end quote. This is truly all we have, and it's not enough. As mentioned on page 959 in the staff report, with this application, there are no specific commercial uses proposed for this building. This doesn't give the city anything to hold Alpha accountable to, not only if they do a NAC, but when and what that will look like. Given this, we believe that planning and zoning made an irresponsible, capricious decision. Referencing the city's historic preservation plan draft of 2010, it states, quote, "There are groups and government bodies whose mission is not directly related to historic preservation, but whose actions nonetheless impact Boise's historic resources." For example, when the Planning and Zoning Commission or the Design Review Commission tackles redevelopment projects in older sections of town, there's frequently a historic component to the proposal or historic resources to be considered, end quote. And I'd like to make a note that we are looking for written language. An example of this would be, in the event that the building sees damage to any windows, fenestration will be replaced with in-kind materials that do not damage or negatively impact the interior or exterior of the facade of the building. Language like this is not present in the development agreement. The neighborhood plan has and will continue to anticipate the continuation of the neighborhood's quiet, safe, and historic character while allowing for change over time. Its visions, principles, goals, and strategies were crafted with input from the neighborhood and the city of Boise. While ENA believes in and understands the urge for the city to increase multifamily housing, especially workforce housing, both of which we support at this site, this should not be done to the detriment of a historic site. And possibly the success of a future neighborhood activity center for market rate housing units. ENA especially sees the need for workforce housing in our neighborhood and requested that the developer consider this, and noted that if they develop the site to preserve the historic nature, they may pursue eligible tax credits that might make some workforce housing financially possible for them to build. By destroying the historic nature of this site and affecting the aspect of integrity, they lose this opportunity. ENA cares about its historic resources, this being one of the most important in our neighborhood. We deserve to see a complete application with a neighborhood activity center that honors the history of the site and, most importantly, integrates well within the neighborhood. However, the plan for this development does not include firm actions on the adaptive reuse of the Armory as a neighborhood activity center, and there's nothing presented by Alpha Development Group. No specific plans for tenants, lease agreements, concept plans, etc., nor have any uses for the site been identified or presented. We've heard of phase 2, but what even is phase 2? We, the city, the public, and ENA need to see this before we can move forward with this entire project. The Planning and Zoning Commission's decision of approval based on the developer's well-intended but not evidence-supported statements on the record is not substantial and is irresponsible decision-making. This method of project approval is not the way to achieve successful, well-planned neighborhood activity centers and sets a terrible precedent for other neighborhood activity centers across the city. We don't want to see this site struggle as 36th and Hill has. Given this information, ENA requests the City Council approve our appeal. We would like to see staff redirected and include the addition of a historic preservation planner to this project to work with the developer to formally analyze the city's few existing neighborhood activity centers, to find successes and failures, and utilize those findings to create a new site plan that shows how the neighborhood activity center integrates with the neighborhood, with concrete evidence showing that the site plan works towards a successful NAC. We ask that there be details and language for this historic preservation mitigation conducted in a manner consistent with the Secretary of the Interior standards, and memorialization efforts for the site as a specific part of the site plan, as conditions to the project, or as amendments to the DA. Ina appreciates your time and dedication to our great city, and I will now stand for questions.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
Oh, not a question, just a comment. I really
Sure.
appreciated that at the end you told us exactly what you wanted us to do.
Oh, of
Appreciate
course.
that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Go ahead.
Madam Mayor, counterpoint. So,
He doesn't appreciate it.
no, I do appreciate it and really great testimony. I appreciate you coming
Thank you.
here. We had a development on Boise Avenue in Protest a while ago, and it was an activity center, neighborhood activity center. And we sent it back because it didn't have any commercial on the bottom floor. And then they came back with the development with commercial on the bottom floor so that there were aspects that served the entire neighborhood. So I'm looking at this one right now, and it has 3,000 square feet of commercial, which is actually a decent amount of square feet. I think we had a 400 square foot proposal or 1,200 square foot proposal last week. And so to kind of council member Bajent's points, are there specific things that you want to see added into? Is it more commercial space? Is it just the definition of what's going into the commercial space? Obviously, historic preservation of the building, but are there any other specific things, items that you would say this is what would make it an activity center?
Sure. Councilmember Halliburton, thank you for your question. Madam Mayor, that 3,000 square feet of commercial space is actually intended to be in the northeast corner of the lot within the new construction. So the lack of any plan that we're referring to is actually the commercial space inside of the Armory building itself, which in and of itself will be the neighborhood activity center. So we have seen nothing. We have been presented with nothing. There have been some whisperings over the years of things that could potentially be there. We would like to see something so that then we can actually take a position as a board, comment on it, but we haven't seen anything and therefore we can't.
Yeah, and Madam Mayor, just to follow up, I agree. I would love to see something in there. But just to make sure that I understand your point correctly, you're not actually talking about changes that you want to see on the development itself as far as the activity center. You're talking about more definition of what would happen inside of the Armory.
Commissioner, Councilmember Halliburton, that is correct. Our appeal is on the grounds of the lack of planning for the neighborhood activity center itself, not necessarily the new development.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Although you didn't note the zoning right now, the C2 zoning, I think, at least in my mind, is a bit of a barrier to redevelopment of the Armory site. If it were to develop now, it would have to overcome that. If it develops next year, would be able to develop under our new zoning code. Has that played into your thoughts at all about how and when the Armory part of the project should come forward?
Councilmember Clegg, yes, it has. We are commenting on what has been presented to us. And if things change with the new zoning code rewrite, we will be able to then comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from the applicant.
We'll wait for David. Madam Mayor.
You just lift this up just a tiny bit.
Sorry. Oh, there you go. That's
Great.
better. Madam Mayor, Madam Council President, council members, thank you very much. My name is Dustin Holt. I'm a principal and partner at Alpha Development Group. I want to thank you for your time and for your service to this community. I want to thank Mr. Moser, and prior to him, and in addition to him, Mr. Wilson, Mr. Lowe, and prior to all of those, our first meeting was Celine way back when. So you guys have wonderful staff. We appreciate the direction and the input that they've provided to us so far. With me tonight is my business partner, Bryce Baker, another principal and partner at Alpha Development Group. our development manager, Brad Watson, our outside legal counsel, Jeff Wardle, and I think our internal general counsels online as well. Alpha Development Group is a regional development company that specializes in multifamily and mixed use. We've developed in 4 states. We've developed over 5,000 multifamily units, over 2 million square feet of commercial. And with all due respect to the applicant, what she doesn't know about us is that we've developed 4 projects in historic landmark commissions that are multifamily and mixed use. In fact, the first new construction for multifamily housing in Salt Lake City was actually developed by us in a historic landmark commission. We have tremendous historic preservation principles. It's actually part of the reason we fell in love with the Armory building in and of itself in the first place. So I appreciate that. We've developed on the multifamily side, everything from 8 units to the acre to over 200 units to the acre. And as I mentioned, in multiple states. Just a quick timeline for you. So J&M Land, we are not associated with J&M Land other than having acquired the property from them, but they acquired this property in 2011. In 2012, there was a zoning that was established on the property. There was also a DA. That DA, that development agreement, was part of the PD or conditional use packet, as well as the information related to the Armory building itself. We acquired the property in July of 21. Shortly thereafter, had our first meeting with staff. Staff gave us direction and talked to us about the 3-legged stool. 1, the development agreement and the guidelines therein. 2, the guidelines inside of the city of Boise zoning ordinance, as well as the neighborhood activity center guidelines. And then 3, the East End Neighborhood Association. And so shortly thereafter, we reached out to the East End Neighborhood Association. We've had multiple meetings with them. That's on my next slide. But a couple of things that, contrary to some comments that do exist and are part of the development agreement. So while the development agreement gave it zoning and included it to be part of a particular zone and redevelopment, as mentioned by David Moser, it prohibited more heavy commercial uses. So more intensive indoor-outdoor storage uses, fuel stations, golf courses, bus stations, bikini bars, mortuaries, mausoleums. So those are in the DA as excluded, prohibited uses. The additional elements that are inside of the DA talk about buildings that should be along Reserve Street, along Avenue H, that they should be oriented to the street, that parking should be located behind or below any of those structures that exist, and that the field and the open space in front of the Armory building facing Reserve should be preserved. There's also a note that the exterior facade of the Armory building should not be materially modified from its original condition. And as you heard from Mr. Moser, there are elevations of the Armory. In our very first meeting with the East End Neighborhood Association back in October of 21, we said, we're in full agreement. Full agreement with that preservation of the building. We absolutely want to work through that. What we are talking about is the parking lot adjacent to it, the surface parking lot. And so as noted here, we had an initial meeting with staff in September, our first meeting with East End Neighborhood Association, October, another one, November, December, January, a meeting in March, April, and then we were before the Planning Commission most recently in December. So we've had multiple meetings with the East End Neighborhood Association, and I'll show you some of those things that we looked at. So we had an initial concept that we wanted to discuss streetscape, pedestrian scale along Logan and Avenue H. And so we started with what I call our block of cheese, a block of cheese of what you can do per the height, per the zone, per the setbacks, per the city ordinance. We then started cutting into that block of cheese to create relief along certain streetscapes. And that's the red blocks that we took out. We took out some of the common area. This was 4 stories over 2 of parking as a note to you. And so that blue level was actually would have been a 5th level above grade. And we said one of the things that we would need to do in exchange for part of this conversation is get your help and your guidance on a 5th level. This is some of the imagery, 2 levels of parking, the 4 stories above it. This is some of the metrics from that plan and that meeting. And by and large, the answer was not only no, but hell no. And we walked away from that meeting with a list of actionable items, what we felt were actionable items, items that we could address, that we did bring back to the East End Neighborhood Association. So stay within 45 feet, the C2 height limit. Please put one level of parking below grade. We think you can do that. We think you can afford it. We think you can accommodate that with the Armory. Please split the housing to two different buildings to allow some view corridor back into the Armory building itself. We need the building facade stepping back from the property line more than the 10-foot setback. That was not something that was deemed as important as some of those other elements that were mentioned. And then make sure that we continue to protect and maintain the appearance of the original Armory building. So we went back to the drawing board and we came back and presented this concept plan. So as David, and this is, this was at the time 75% of what David has presented and is in our packet. One full level of subterranean parking, a level of at-grade parking that along the south and east facades are screened with residential units, direct access walk-up units. At the far north end, retail space, that's the 3,000 square feet of retail space. In addition to the 56,000 square feet of the Armory building itself. But one of the biggest pieces of this is the 380 plus parking stalls that are going to be built in conjunction with this, that then allow for uses to come into the Armory building itself, which is why we've looked at that as a phase 2. I've had multiple conversations with users, some operators literally within walking distance here of City Hall that would love a second location or a facility in this building. And every time I talk to them, they say, when can I open and have someone sit at my table? And I say, well, my parking will be done 2 years from now. And they say, great, call us 6 months before you're done. So getting the parking built as part of this is a major catalyst for us and for this project. As noted, the original request was 312,000 square feet of FAR. We're about 277. With the exception of the elevator shaft, we're right at that height limit. We're maintaining the front yard setbacks, pushing it out to the street and giving as much buffer as we can to the side of the Armory building. As it relates to the 3 items from the appeal, item number 1, the building designs detrimental to historic preservation of the site. We obviously could not disagree more. The open space in front of it along Reserve and the view corridor and the view shed back into the Armory building itself from the north is not only being untouched, it will be enhanced and bettered. Second, we agreed to the point of splitting our building into 2 so that there was a view corridor back into the Armory building. And then the 2 buildings are more than an adequate separation space between the Armory and the new development. Here's some of the images. And what's hard to see here is that we have gone to the parking level. Some of the same columns and vertical ribbing on the Armory building is displayed on the exterior of this building. So taking architectural bits and pieces and elements from the Armory building itself into this multifamily building. Point number 2, a neighborhood activity center. Again, this is straight from Boise City Code. This is what we were directed to by Boise staff in our very first meeting. You need to look at this. You need to look at an FAR of 0.5 to 0.2. You need to look at coffee shops. You need to look at restaurants. You need to look at office. You need to look at making certain that you incorporate and integrate all of these things to create a successful NAC. You need housing. So we have 59-ish thousand square feet between the 3,000 feet at the front of the Armory or the multifamily project and 56,000 square feet in the Armory building to accommodate just that, create a true neighborhood activity center. Here's a list of some of the items that in a request from the neighborhood, items they'd like to see in the area: coffee shop, bike shop, brew pub, restaurant, food trucks, outdoor gathering, bakery, an area for community meetings, an area to identify and recognize veterans, an indoor bike park. That one I'm not sure about. But all of the others on this list, absolutely. These are permitted or conditional uses under C2. And we couldn't agree more that all of them belong in the Armory, in this project, in this area. Point number 3, the decision was capricious. Again, in going back to our first meeting with city staff and talking about that 3-legged stool, we have a development agreement that has certain requirements and ordinances and restrictions and covenants in it. We have a city ordinance, zoning ordinance, and a NAC that has other elements that are required as part of it. And then we have input that we've tried to incorporate from the East End Neighborhood Association. But there are 2 documents that govern this property by and large, other than personal preferences and opinions. And so adhering to those 2 and then trying to incorporate some of those actionable items that we've heard is what we believe we have done. We do not believe it's been in a capricious manner. We think staff got the initial staff report right. We think that the Planning Commission got their unanimous decision correct. And we believe staff got their report correct this evening. And so with that, I'm happy to take any questions. Otherwise, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Questions? Dustin, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Questions?
Madam Mayor. So you heard my questions about landmark status. What's your reaction to establishing a landmark status on the building?
I think it's, again, I think that even to quote Mr. Everhart's SHPO letter down to his last paragraph, I think it's in his last or second last paragraph, he says the effects to the building would be limited and not jeopardize the national registered eligibility. We agree. We don't see the development of the parking lot impacting or limiting or inhibiting those efforts and those elements. And that's something that we've said, I think, from the beginning. We knew the DA had some of those restrictions in it. And when you go in that building, I pay a grundle to get the wood and the board form concrete that building is. I spend a lot trying to replicate that today.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Maybe I can ask that question again, but maybe in a different way. Have you done any research to know whether or not the designation of this site as a landmark would affect any future plans in a negative way?
I have not, admittedly have not.
And so what I'm hearing is you feel like the development agreement that's in place is sort of doing the same thing as having a landmark status, correct?
Correct.
Would you be opposed to exploring what a landmark status might mean to the building?
To the building, no.
Great.
To the building, no. I think that a 100-year-old surface parking lot hopefully isn't have real historic merit, right? I mean, you look at Hyde Park, which is an incredible asset to the city, totally agree. But that's a row of 100-year-old buildings with some new development that's in between it. But by and large, it was old structures, not an old surface parking lot.
Yeah. And Madam Mayor, just one more question, not related.
And actually, I just asked for clarification. Were you asking specifically as well about the Armory itself?
The Armory itself.
Okay.
One more question. One of the things that I feel like I'm hearing from some of the neighbors and the neighborhood association is trying to get a better picture of what will be inside of the Armory in the future, and probably some fear of it being something that doesn't serve the neighborhood well. And I guess I hear that you say that you're open to a list of things that it could be. I'm trying to figure out what sort of assurance or predictability we could give to the neighborhood in knowing what might take place on the inside in the future.
And I apologize, Mr. Council Member and Madam Mayor. I think that's a great question. We admittedly have struggled with that, right? So what was not mentioned, and had I known we were going to get into the interior of the Armory building, there have been 4 or 5 concept plans that have been shared with the East End neighborhood. So we have looked at, in fact, the traffic study was based on 9,000 square feet of restaurant and retail use and 46,000 square feet of other gathering spaces or co-working type spaces and facilities. So those ideas and those visions have been shared. We've struggled with how you do that today without creating such rigidity that any minor little change has to come back before this body. So as we've talked to staff, it's been uses inside of that use. You've got a slew of uses that are permitted. You also have uses, even a brew pub, that's conditional because of its nature. And so as we've gone through that list, they're all on the list of items we would like to see in there. And so I think back to Councilwoman Clegg's point, that the zoning governance and some of those uses, I think is, in addition to the DA, is, in addition to creating a NAC, is layering on different levels of some of that governance.
Great. And I guess just to make sure that I understood you correctly, I think you also said that you thought by creating the additional parking within the structure would open up future opportunities for the Armory to actually develop in a way that might be appealing.
Yeah, I mean, Mr. Councilmember, yes, Madam President, yes, Madam Mayor, sorry. Yes, I mean, I think that's going to be a key driver, is having additional bodies there, additional bike paths, pedestrian paths, many elements of this plan that I geek out about. And unfortunately, we have to focus on this piece right now. But yeah, there's a lot that are in our plan right now, going through that or going into that process.
Okay, thank you.
Looks like there's nothing further. I have one question. I was just curious to pick up on the council member's line of questioning. Cindy had also referenced within her presentation, concern that there wasn't adequate protections for the building built in, not the landmark status, but if windows are broken, the same or equal quality so that it doesn't impact potential landmark designation would be replaced. And just wondering your thoughts on, I'm not voting, but I'm just curious, on whether or not you'd be opposed to additional protection language to mitigate potential impact during construction.
Yeah. Madam Mayor, I'm counsel for Alpha Development, Jeff Wardle. My address is 251 East Front. I'm feeling a sense of deja vu all over again with an appeal from last week where these very same issues were raised. And I think the issue is this is an appeal and your code says you either have to find error, and if you find error, you can then impose additional conditions or you uphold the decision. And what's a little frustrating with this appeal and the questions that have been posed is, I think what the East End Neighborhood Association is appealing is a desire to create an application that isn't the application that exists in this situation. So absolutely, we're invested in complying with the development agreement. We're invested in preserving the property. We are not touching this. My clients purchased it with a development agreement that this body put in place when this body surplused the property.
I'm just wondering if
So-
I asked a question.
Yeah.
I
So
just
the-
love that.
So the
answer.
struggle just is, what is the mechanism for these additional things that people want that aren't consistent with the code?
So is the answer no?
No, and I'll talk, and I appreciate Jeff. The answer isn't no. I think the question is the mechanism or formality to do it. We're not asking to amend a DA. And so what that mechanism is to actually do that, I have no
Sure,
idea.
Conditions.
Again,
I
yeah.
don't need the whole long answer. I
No.
just, and I heard
Madam
from the
Mayor,
applicant that it's
conditions are
not no.
appropriate, but there has to be a finding of error, and we have yet to hear how the PUD standards were not met.
Jeff, please. I
Just-
was curious about, one thing that came up. Thank you. Any further questions for the applicant? All right, we'll go ahead and hear from the public now.
Madam Mayor, thank you.
We've got Greg Ostro first.
Hi. My name is Greg Ostro. I live at 201 East Louisa Street. Madam Mayor, Madam Council President, and council members, please excuse me from doing that again. It's hard for me. I wrote these issues, and as an architect, I might butcher it because I can't read my own writing, okay? See?
I usually can't read mine either.
Yeah, that's a rough presentation to follow. But I think when you're done listening to me, you're going to understand your process is broken. Okay. And we can do better. I'm speaking as an individual, not as an Enid board member. I voted not to appeal the project after coming and talking to P&Z. I didn't feel there was a point to appeal it. The fate of the armory and the gateway to the military reserve was decided in 2012 when the city surplus the building to private development. Okay. The neighborhood has supported Alpha development throughout the design process. Alpha has done a great job of responding to us and to the neighbors' concerns. The reality of the armory becoming a neighborhood activity center is closer than it has ever been before. But it might be too late, and that's why I want to talk to you a little bit more, hopefully, about process. The neighborhood is only asking that the project do its best to mitigate the negative impacts. I don't know if any of you back in 2000, who was on the council, but did anybody think there was going to be 200 apartment units put on that parking lot 10 years ago? You did. Okay. I feel that staff didn't do their job because the development agreement it limits 17 uses. It allows 70 uses such as concert hall. Maybe the verbiage of the development agreement should read, this is what you can put there: the barber, the coffee shop, the bar, the neighborhood's just looking for some, throw us a bone. I mean, we're giving up a lot of area. It's going to be impacted. It's not going to be great. The access to military reserve, but these guys are good. Okay. Which brings me back to the next point. What stops Alpha from selling the property? What stops Dustin? I've known these guys for 2 years. I love them. Okay. They're great guys, but they're here tonight. They might not be here in 2 years when this project is developed. At the end of the night, when the P&Z president said, trust the developer, I trust these guys. Okay. But there's no guarantee that they're going to be there in a couple of years. They can sell the project to another developer. As far as I know, the project is still 2 separate properties. They could probably sell the armory property. That's a legal part I don't know.
Time.
It was supposed to be put into one property. At the
Greg,
time.
you're at time.
Oh,
I always
three
let
minutes?
people finish with their last sentence as long as it's not a run-on sentence.
okay, it's not. I am not appealing the apartments. I am appealing to you to get back in your neighborhoods and listen to your neighbors. Discuss issues and solutions with them. That's the democratic way. Come to compromise. Don't just throw a meeting.
Okay, this is definitely run-on. Thank you. There are too many semicolons in there, Greg. Sorry about that. All right. We've got Deanna Smith next.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's not, maybe just lift it a bit.
How's that?
Yeah, it's better.
Okay. Good evening, Deanna Smith, 1208 East Jefferson Street, Boise, Idaho. I'm here tonight to ask your support for Ena's appeal of the Planning and Zoning's decision to approve PUD 220060. Ena worked with the city to protect the Armory building site because of its value to our neighborhood and the city. Tonight, we ask you to follow through on our mutual commitment to creating a gathering place on this site that honors this historic place while also revitalizing it as a neighborhood activity center. This PUD is a plan for multifamily market rate housing on a historic site and future NAC without plans for the activity center or historic protection. P&Z approved an incomplete application for a phased PUD that lacks a second phase, a site plan for the whole site, and details for the NAC or historic preservation. The application covers only one of 2 parcels, yet gives the developer a density allowed by combining the parcels. The staff report and the decision treat the site as 2 parcels. We learned from city staff this approach is acceptable, and by keeping the parcels separate through the approval has allowed development of only one of the parcels while acknowledging the parcels will be combined following the approval. Per the application, Alpha Development states they are seeking approval for the development of the land parcel located east of the Boise Armory. Regardless of when these parcels are combined, city plans clearly indicate the Armory site and the NAC includes both parcels. Thus, the application should have included plans for the entire site, its uses, and historic significance. We know this site is challenging and have offered Alpha Group assistance with developing the activity center. The applicant expressed their need for enough units to make the project financially viable, and we are not asking for fewer units, only that the site plan integrate the activity center with the neighborhood and honor the historic values. Early on, we suggested a smaller footprint building on the northeast edge of the site per the development agreement and achieve the necessary number of units by building more townhomes on Logan to Avenue H, converting the unnecessary new 3,000 square feet of commercial space to residential, adding some height, and locating access to Avenue H between the townhomes and the apartment building. This would open up the site to the neighborhood, create an outdoor plaza between the Armory and Avenue H, and move the mass away from the Armory building per SHPO's recommendation, retaining more of the site for the Armory. To our knowledge, these ideas were not explored. ENA has presented evidence that the decisions to approve this PUD lacks accountability for development of the entire site, creating a NAC, protecting the historic nature, and does not comply with city plans and goals, thus approving an application that neglects to address fundamental city directives. Boise needs housing, and our neighborhood is excited for the prospect of finally having the Armory revitalized. But this should not come at the expense of quality planning for neighborhood gathering places or historic sites, especially when that housing does not address workforce or affordable housing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm done.
Questions for Deanna? Right, thanks.
Madam Mayor,
Oh, yeah.
sorry. So quick question, Deanna, how would you have them clarify what they could do with the building and now at this point? I mean, I'm thinking of, for instance, the Harris Ranch specific plan. It had a neighborhood center, a village center, but it didn't specify what was going to be in it. We have a building here that clearly is going to be used somehow once this gets built. And I guess I'm trying to get my head around what promises would be enough.
I think it's less about specifics and more about the silence. There really is nothing in this application that addresses the neighborhood activity center. So other PUDs I've been involved with that are larger and mixed use, they have some concepts. They have, they have some conversations that they're having with certain kinds of businesses. And while we've had those, a tiny bit of that conversation has happened offline, and a little bit happened at the hearing, there is nothing in writing. And it's more about the site design and how it might impact the success of what does go in there. We're confident, or I'm personally confident, that if Alpha Group does continue developing this, they'll work hard to create the kind of activity center we want. I believe the site plan is detrimental to the success of that activity center. The site plan hides the Armory from the neighborhood. Yes, Reserve is nice and open, but that's the back of that's not our neighborhood. That looks to the foothills and other city uses, that looks at the parks. You can't even see the Armory from the neighborhood any longer, and you can barely get there from the neighborhood without going around and coming in from Reserve. You can no longer see the arch, which is one of the most significant architectural historic features of that building. So our concern is to respect the site and recognize that it be a neighborhood activity center, meaning it speaks to the neighborhood, it integrates with the neighborhood, And that it also, there's some language, Cindy pointed out the language that we would like that really protects the future historic preservation of it.
Madam Mayor, could I follow up? So as I'm looking at the site plan, there is an access from Logan. Are you saying that's not a big enough one? It's not adequate?
There is one small access from Logan. You can't see it. The plaza, the activity is hidden away from the neighborhood. It's not integrated with the neighborhood the way a Bound crossing is. I think Bound's a good example. Bound was planned really well. That was part of a larger PUD, and it was thought thoroughly through with all the housing that came and the new streets that came. We're not seeing that here, that level of thought to what should this site look like to create a really dynamic future neighborhood activity center.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Thanks, Deanna. Brittany?
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
We're limited to parties of record.
I'm sorry, what?
We're limited to parties of record on the appeal.
Oh, I would imagine that Brittany was a party of
I signed
record.
up.
What?
I signed up.
No, it's just the party of record piece. I'm just,
Preservation Idaho.
you were representing Preservation Idaho?
Yeah.
Right. Does that work, James? Are you on their board?
I'm the board president.
You did.
Angie Steele presented for Preservation Idaho last time around. Written testimony. Yeah, we're good.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Thank you.
I'm going to ask that you use the Preservation Idaho address and that you correct this afterwards.
Yes. We have a PO box and I have no idea what that is.
We'll need to get that.
Okay, I can
And so before you leave
Can I
this
look it
evening,
up
I'm going to have you do this.
afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Brittany Sigliano, Preservation Idaho, PO Box something, Boise. Thank you. PO Box 1495, Boise, Idaho. Council, Madam Mayor, Council, it's good to be before you all again. It's fun to sit on this side and watch everyone's faces. I appreciate the questions that are coming for this, and I sense a solution and a resolution coming forward. So as a party of record for this appeal, I appreciate the opportunity to publicly comment on this once again. So Councilmember Clegg, I think I can answer maybe some of your questions that you had earlier with a little bit of history. So in August 2012, PI wrote a letter to the P&Z Commission urging denial of the rezone of the parcel, quote, unless language was added to protect its historic integrity. The P&Z Commission ultimately approved the application and recommended the Armory site be designated as a city historic landmark as a method of protection for the site. P&Z presented the recommendation to council ahead of the conception and adoption of the DA. The City Council did not adopt the P&Z's recommendation for historic landmark designation, and therefore it was unfortunately rather through oversight or intent left unresolved. So there is no protection. Since 1979, the City of Boise's had the ability through ordinance to landmark local buildings for preservation. It wasn't until the city received a grant from Preservation America in 2008 that the City of Boise Historic Preservation Commission took steps to landmark properties. The majority of these properties are outside of local historic districts. John Turtlet and Charles Hummel were responsible for the design of many of the buildings in Boise, and there are several landmark buildings of their designs in the city. Not all historic buildings are worthy of historic preservation, let alone designation, as landmarks, just not all landmarks are historic structures. However, this nationally registered historic armory site is worthy and warrants our respect. Without landmark designation for the site, there is no tangible, measurable protection in the DA if any damages are incurred outside of what the city requires the developer to do in order to redevelop the site. The quest for additional residential inventory does not have to be achieved at the expense of significant historic buildings and sites. Both can be accomplished. And in fact, it sounds like Alpha is supportive of having those protections on this building. So Preservation Idaho implores this council to responsibly act in the best interests of protecting this site by requesting historic landmark designation for this site per section 218.8 of Boise City Code. Furthermore, PI urges the council to require the application contain a written mitigation plan that reflects the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation, as is the nationally accepted gold standard for this process for unprotected properties.
One last sentence.
I don't think that Alpha has any ill will, but accidents happen, and we have seen that before, and we are simply trying to mitigate that.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Any questions for Preservation Idaho? Thank you, Brittany. Anyone else in the room planning on testifying? Come on. Don't, that's all right. Yep, I saw you on here. And then I'll just need you to put, after you talk, you can put your name there. Yeah. Will you lift the mic?
Madam Mayor.
Thanks,
City
welcome.
Council. My name is Gordon Trounson. I live at 1143 East Santa Maria Drive. As we've stated from the very beginning, we're not opposed to something built there. I mean, it's obviously something was going to be built there. However, I do feel that the P&Z was capricious, and it's a subjective, or it can be a subjective term. Did not play out what a question I had, and really is the compatibility with the neighborhood. What this gets to is that this building is large. It's larger because they're able to combine the two lots for the density, understand that. But it would like to just be able to see something that would, again, not overshadow our armory, our city's armory. And I ask you, and just because they can have it up to 45 feet, should they have it up to 45 feet? And I'm not sure how, whether it's a design or such, but there really are things that this armory is beautiful. I see it every day. I see it out of my window every day. I drive by it every day. So do thousands of other people. And I just ask that maybe my consideration be is to somehow get this so that the armory really stands out, as opposed to being this, 45-foot building that goes straight up. I know it's a very subjective, but I do think it would definitely add to the armory and add to our neighborhood and add to the city. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, I don't have any other parties of record online.
Yep, you are. Come on up. I don't, is she a party of record?
No. Stay there, please.
Because then she cannot come up.
Yeah, we don't want that. You're okay. Just stay right there, sweetie. My name is Josh Kuntz. I live at 2683 North Peregrine Place here in Boise. I also own 611 East Reserve Street, which is approximately 100 yards west of this proposed development. I would like to start my testimony.
Oh, yeah, I was totally kidding. Yeah. I'm sorry.
No worries. Well, I don't know how this will go. All right. I feel that
I'm sorry.
I feel that P&Z was a little hasty and irresponsible in approving the plan. I will first say that I do like the idea of having the site developed with housing and mixed use in the armory. I think Alpha has done a fine job designing the new housing component of this project, but I see this development as a three-legged stool that only has one acceptable leg at this point. So let me address the two wobbly legs. Similar to what we've already heard from Ina and several others that have testified before me, I'm concerned by the lack of specific plans for the armory building itself. This is such a special spot that we need to be very sure that it is done right. I urge you to find a way to require Alpha to create a comprehensive plan for the armory with some more tangible assurances that Alpha has a good plan for this piece of the puzzle that is acceptable both to the neighbors and to you as city leaders. The second dodgy leg is the traffic impacts and the likely changes needed to Reserve, Avenue H, and Logan Streets. I urge you to look closely at the traffic estimates for this development. They are alarming, to say the least. I urge you to spend 20 to 30 minutes at the site around 5 or 6 p.m. and just imagine the additional traffic impacts that 200 units and potentially popular restaurants, bars, and retail spaces will have. If you do that, I feel very confident it'll become abundantly clear to you that big changes will be needed to address the safety and accomplish making this a desirable destination similar to Bound Crossing and Hyde Park. At this point, I don't see any plans that would address those street needs and traffic needs. As I said, I believe it's a three-legged stool. I think they've done a great job talking to the neighbors and coming up with these really nice looking plans. However, similar to others have said, the Armory plans are lacking in my opinion, and traffic and roads, the road issues have just been overlooked at this point. I would just urge you to go back into the plans and really think about that overwhelmingly. So I just request that you do what is best for our community and find a path to require Alpha to create a better plan as we go forward. I thank you very much. I'll stand for any questions, but I will promise you there are people who are far more educated about this in the room that would do a better job of answering them.
Thanks. All right, doesn't look like there are any questions. Thanks for being here. Are there further questions for staff before we go to rebuttals? All right, doesn't look like it right now. It's an appeal. So first we have the applicant. Welcome back.
Madam Mayor. Council members, thank you. Is it, I can't hear myself this time. Oh, there you go.
they
Okay,
just-
Madam Mayor, council members, thank you. Here's the challenge that I have. We have governing documents that help us understand various pieces and components in our hands, tangible today. A zone, the outline and narrative and description of what constitutes a neighborhood activity center, and the development agreement. And I think it was Confucius who said, if you ask a group to design a horse, you'll get a camel. And that's what I'm afraid of. I can tell you one of my first meetings with Ina was, will you do something about those awful windows that they put in when they changed it? There's probably someone in the audience who likes those windows. And so the fear I have is when I read a statement, a generic statement like, if a window gets broken or a lintel breaks or a header breaks, will you do something to replace it? I can immediately say yes. That seems easy to me on its cusp. But when you dig deeper, is that the current windows that someone hates? Is that the replaced windows? What is that window and where does that stop? And I think that's the challenge that we have had with the East End Neighborhood Association. I think one of the things you heard from even their own board members is there are personal preferences and personal opinions that we've tried to weave. And I fall back to, I don't know how to ask a group to do that without getting a camel. And I think what everyone collectively doesn't want is a camel. And so I look at the documents of record, the DA with elevations of the Armory building, prohibited uses at that point in time that were excluded, statements about maintaining significant compliance or material compliance of the exterior materiality. And that tells me the shell of the building and that it needs to be preserved. And then from there, the neighborhood activity center and its guidelines tell me some of the uses that are appropriate for a neighborhood activity center. And then from there, the zoning ordinance tells me what fits from setbacks, separations, heights, and other things associated with a zoning that was given to this property. And so that is the challenge that I have, is we didn't come before the Planning and Zoning Commission specific to the Armory building. It was a PD site plan. We shared concepts with Ina and others about the Armory building itself that fit within that zone, fit within the development agreement, we're not asking to open that up or to modify it or to change it. And that's the struggle that I have, is where do you say stop when those documents exist and are in place and have governance? So we appreciate the effort that staff has put in to our review. They've seen an even bigger package with the full design review criteria and the design review submittal for this building. They have an even bigger understanding of what we're trying to accomplish. And so for me, when David and others review this, put forward a positive recommendation, and when they, specific to this matter, put forth a request to deny the appeal, I think it's because they understand in our multiple meetings and in our much larger packets of drawings what we're trying to accomplish. So for that, I would respectfully ask you to deny the appeal request and allow us to continue to move forward with development. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Madam Mayor.
Yep, we've got a question.
Sorry,
Dustin.
one quick question. Obviously today's application is not for the Armory building, it's for the parcel next door. And you didn't get a chance to talk about it as much as I think maybe you wanted, but could you go into a little bit more detail about the workforce housing you're planning to build, the nature of workforce housing and what that means?
We're not proposing any workforce housing.
Oh. Well, I'm looking at something else. I apologize. Tell me about the housing you are planning to build.
Certainly. So the 205 units, our current design application, we actually removed one of the units and are proposing a rooftop patio. Again, some input from adjacent neighbors up on Reserve Street. So it's actually 205 units, and those range from studios up to 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath, 2-car garage townhomes. So we do not get into affordable housing. But we certainly like to have attainable housing. And in part to us, that means creating the biggest, broadest spectrum of units that are attainable for the largest bandwidth of resident here in Boise specifically. A couple other of the cool merits of it, up the side of the Armory building and between the apartment building, that entire pathway we've looked at in pavers. So it's a connection of the trail network system that comes up onto Logan Avenue to get over to the sidewalk, to get to the Hawk Light, to get to the park and the bike park and many other things. So trying to create and get people off of that area. We petitioned ACHD to get a bulb intersection at the corner at Ina's request, and it sounds like ACHD is amenable to that. So getting on-street parking on Logan and on Avenue H as natural traffic calming measures, and then getting that sidewalk bulb out further into the street so someone can feel like they can walk out, look and see traffic. So I think there's incredible things that we're trying to do at a much greater scale that are enhancements to the community that unfortunately we don't get a whole lot of time to talk about. So I appreciate Councilmember Baggett. I appreciate you asking about it.
I apologize for putting you on the wrong foot. I'm reading that portion of Blueprint Boise about workforce housing, and I see discussion in the P&Z about things that are going to work. So I crossed it up. I apologize for that.
No worries.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Yep.
I have a question. And I know that these apartments won't be built for a while, but could you give us a sense of what they'll be rented for?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Willits. So we've got everything from, I think it's about a 500 square foot studio to 1,450 square foot 3-bedroom, 2-bath unit. And so I think that range in a current market state, who knows if it goes up or down with where the economy is, but in a current market state, that's going to be anything from $1,350, $1,450 up to $2,800, $2,900 a month.
Thanks. Appreciate that.
Yep. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Come on up. Welcome back, Cindy.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. David, would you mind putting up that? Oh, great. Thank you. Ina appreciates Alpha being here and reviewing their neighborhood and community engagement history with us. I would like to clarify my earlier point because I do think it's important to make the distinction. Alpha has not done a neighborhood activity center on a historic site. They may have worked with historic buildings, but we're talking about a specific neighborhood activity center at a nationally registered site that has no protections from the city. And when construction is happening with this new development, accidents happen. Not only do accidents happen, but if they're going to be drilling into that parking lot that, I'm sorry, does have historic merit. Historically, that parking lot was used for the horses. It was used to park vehicles, and it was used for training for the Idaho National Guard. So whether or not a parking lot tends to have historic merit, it typically tends to not, but in this case, it does. We are asking for protections. We're asking for specific language. The DA does not include this. It doesn't have it. And I did include it in my appeal memoranda. We could go through it if you'd like to see it. It's not there. So again, I'd like to clarify my earlier point. ENA recognizes Alpha's history in development in multifamily housing on historic landmark commissions, but we are asking for things that are not there. As Greg mentioned, the DEA does list 17 prohibited uses for the site, and per the zone, there are 53 other potentials. Alpha even said they've struggled with determining what they're going to do at this site because it's not easy. And in terms of the 45-foot height limit, we did not say, please stay within the 45-foot height limit. We requested that if the building mass remained that large, that the height limit be kept, whatever the smaller footprint building we could see, allowing additional height. And again, we're asking for a plan. We're asking for historic protective measures for the Armory site. The Idaho National Guard Armory has been part of Idaho's identity and history for nearly a century. Designed by Turtelot and Hummel, the building was first constructed in 1931 by J.O. Jordan and was located between the historic East End neighborhood and the Fort Boise Military Reserve, both areas of significant importance to both Idaho and the city of Boise's history. There are over 30 Turtelot and Hummel landmarks in the city of Boise, as is right now, that are not in historic districts. SHPO's letter that I have here, it says that this new development on the site will negatively impact the aspect of integrity of setting. And that is because the setting of this site is the open parking lot, is the foothills, is the proximity to Fort Boise. And putting this development on that site will negatively impact arguably the most important aspect of integrity for the site. And while construction of the development's magnitude, damages to the Armory building are not only possible, but they're inevitable. And there are a lack of protections to the site. Therefore, every eligibility potential to this site for National Historic Register purpose is at risk. What happens if, again, the drilling affects the import concrete facade of the building? Then what? Alpha has nothing to look to. How do they fix it? And that's why the Secretary of the Interior Standards is, as Preservation Idaho mentioned, the national gold standard for practice. So if council needs a specific finding for approval of the appeal, the error is that the DA does not include specific historic preservation mitigation language for the historic Armory site as stated by staff and the Planning and Zoning Commission. Again, ENA requests the council to approve our appeal. And with that, I will stand for questions. Oh, I'm sorry. I have one more thing. Back to the workforce housing question. I do think that Councilmember Bajent's question of that was very, very timely. There is no workforce housing proposed. $2,900 for a 3-bedroom apartment is not affordable. It's not affordable for my family. It's not affordable for families like mine in Boise. And again, at the risk of the historic site for market rate housing, it's just not acceptable. Thank you.
Thanks. Any questions?
Madam Mayor.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to say something that I feel like is accurate, and please tell me why I'm wrong. So there's a chance that the Armory building itself might get damaged during construction of the development that's going on next door. And then at some point, the Armory building is going to develop into a building. So wouldn't it be the developer's best interest to make sure that it fixes the Armory building if there was damage that was done during construction? And when that does get developed, won't that get fixed?
Absolutely, Commissioner, or I'm sorry, Councilmember Halliburton, absolutely. But the question is, if they do fix it, and of course it is in their best interest to do so, how they fix it will affect National Register eligibility standing for the site. So therefore, it could lose it. If they just do a terrible patch job on the side, not to say that they would, but if something happened, the site may lose its historic standing. And when that happens, especially if there are no protections, who's to say that they can't come back to you and argue that it's time for demo? And we really don't want to see that happen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Madam Mayor?
Yeah.
Question for staff.
Yep.
So my question is kind of along those same lines. In the development agreement, it talks about protecting the facade of the building or preserving the facade of the building of the Armory. And so I'm guessing my question is, if the Armory building develops in the future, if there's some sort of damage that's done to the Armory building, what is outlined in the development agreement to make sure that it's done properly and historically?
Madam Mayor, Council Pro Tem Halliburton, I'd have to go back and take a look. There are specific at the development agreement within its exhibits specifically calls out exhibits in the back that detail the facade and what it's supposed to look like and what ultimately supposed to be. And I don't think it goes in so much as the detail as call out specifics for if something gets damaged or of that nature. I don't know if maybe the applicant might help, or I can take a look at the development agreement itself specifically and see what the language says. But I don't think it goes into in-depth detail per se on that topic.
That was a very specific question that I asked you, so I appreciate your best effort in answering. Thank you.
Madam Mayor. David, I also have a question. So along the same lines, a little bit different. The developer's attorney attempted to argue that we could only add conditions if we find error in the decision. As I'm reading our code, we can find that there wasn't supported by substantial evidence. And if we found that, we could add a condition that would remedy that evidence. Am I reading that correctly?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Clegg, that's my interpretation too.
Okay. And so we could potentially add a condition. I mean, we've had other developments where we've protected trees on the site from the construction that happens around them. We could potentially add a condition that the Armory building needs to be protected during construction from any damage.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Clegg, that's my interpretation.
Thank you.
Anything further? All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing.
I'll go ahead and make a motion on this then. I move that we deny the appeal on PUD 22-60 East End Neighborhood Association at 801 East Reserve Street of the Planning and Zoning Commission's approval of the conditional use permit for a PUD on the site. However, that we find that substantial evidence was not addressed during the decision to protect the adjacent historic structure from damage during construction, and that we add a condition, and I will allow staff to determine where it should be placed in the list of conditions to that the historic structure be protected from damage during construction of the new buildings.
Second.
We have a motion and second discussion.
Madam Mayor, I still think that it's possible that this building could be landmarked. I don't think that it's appropriate to start into that discussion or decision tonight because we don't know what the outcome of it would be. We don't know what the impact would be on the decision. I think there was a lot of evidence on the record that the proposed structure will not damage the historic nature of the site. However, there was potential that the building could be damaged during construction, and I think at least protecting that ensures that the building will be there in good shape for redevelopment after this new building is built. Like I said, I don't think that that precludes this body from also pursuing a landmark status for the building at some time in the future.
Madam Mayor. This building, I also drive by every single day. And I have talked to many business owners throughout the years who would love to be part of the redevelopment of this building. And for various reasons, with the prior owner, that was impossible. Really cool, I mean, cool stuff, like people wanting to have commercial breweries in there and brew pubs, and just could not make it work. So I know that the demand is there to have something on this site. I know that the neighborhood supports having something at the site. The question comes down to how do we ensure that we're revitalizing the Armory, which is a huge building, lots of commercial space. Don't probably need much more on the site. Just, developing the Armory is plenty for a really great neighborhood commercial center. And also providing the housing that we need to support that commercial center and to support our neighborhood. This is the perfect spot for housing. It's close to one of our largest employers. It's close to downtown. You have loads of recreational opportunity. You're close to the VA. You're close to St. Luke's. You're close to a great school. There's lots of walkability. So I am so thankful that someone is finally looking at this site seriously and looking at this site for its potential and its possibility, and has brought us something that I think makes good on that. Is it exactly what I would have designed if I were developing it? No, but I'm not a developer. We really rely on people to take in neighborhood input. I think you all have done a great job. I live within the area of notice and purposely did not attend any of your meetings, have spoken minimally with my neighbors about it because I really wanted to come into this with fresh eyes and hear people's concerns. But I'm super excited. I think it's going to be cool. I think we're going to be able to protect the historic integrity of the Armory. That view from reserve, I think, is super important. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing this all built out and having a beer on a patio someday. I think it's going to be great. So thank you.
Madam Mayor. So I went through and really tried to look at some of the transcripts that happened at the Planning and Zoning Commission to feel like if there was an error that was made, and I really didn't see an error. I do see a different definition as far as what people sort of consider neighborhood activity centers. And there is sort of the gray area. What does that mean? And so many times up here, we've interpreted activity centers as something that serves that particular neighborhood, but also some surrounding neighborhoods as well. It usually includes housing, usually includes more connection, pedestrian and bicycle connection, and it usually includes some form of commercial that's going to serve that area. And the actual development itself, in my eyes and in the Planning and Zoning Commission's eyes, does all of those things in addition to kind of opening up the doors for the Armory building to better serve as an activity center. And it's been sitting there for so long without the ability to do that. And I hope that this is sort of a key towards moving that forward. Certainly there's a lot of history in that area, and surface level parking is definitely something that we're not looking at preserving. And but I do understand the view and wanting to be able to ride or walk past and being able to see the armory. I do appreciate some of the efforts that were taken in doing that. It is going to change in that area. But I do think that there's still so much of it that is preserved. Also, one historic thing that happened was that I held a bike race called Helodrome there. It was the Boise Bicycle Project's first. Yeah, I don't know how we got insurance for it, but we held a bike race in the parking lot with gravel all over the place. There is a lot of history for that neighborhood there. And there's been a lot of history in waiting for this building to develop. You know, there were times where the windows were boarded up and it was looking really, really rough. And then it gradually got looking a little bit better. And my hope is that it continues to look better and better and better. And I think that that's what we'll see as more funds are invested in it. So I'm going to support, denying the appeal. Also looking at the protections that we might be able to put in place for construction. And I don't see an error that was made in the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting.
Madam Mayor, I agree with the motion. I'm not sure about the condition. And the reason is the protectable interest is the historic character, which is protected at least in part by the development agreement. The development agreement is substantial evidence. And so in my mind, the motion is correct, but I don't think the condition is legally supported. So I won't vote in favor of the motion for that reason, but the motion itself I would agree with.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
I have a question for the maker of the motion, and it might be better for staff. I want to better understand, the protection during construction, what that would require. I don't think there's an intent to hurt the armory, but what is the city now telling the developer that they have to do during construction from a logistics perspective with the motion?
I was actually going to add that we would ask staff to return with a reasoned decision and the actual condition that I'm asking for so that we could look at the language. My intent is that during construction, the developer has to be careful with a building that's only 24 feet away in many cases from where the construction is going to be happening. Certainly, I've been on development sites where the workers are not careful in such a way and could damage something that was only 24 feet away. And so the intent would be that the condition remind the developer that they have to be extra careful on that edge, and that when they drill for pilings, if they need to, whatever they need to do, that they do what they have to protect the foundation of the building that's so near.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Mayor, I do have one more comment. I apologize. I don't find it appropriate to require the developer who's not purchasing the land at this very moment to make it registered as a landmark. I think it's a really good idea. And I think that you should consider doing it for the neighborhood, in the fear that it does pass on. I'm not going to make that or ask that it be required in the conditions, but I do think that it would be helpful if the developer would consider doing that. I also am hesitant to do that just because I don't know if there's an additional issues that may cause in the development, but that might be something that we could look into.
Well, I won't be voting, but I just wanted to say a couple things. First, I appreciate everybody that was here tonight and that's been involved throughout. I was a young, new city council person when we saw this in 2012. And I will often tell people and told people that approached me, asking about this project when it was likely for sale again, the land, that the one thing that I regretted in retrospect was that we didn't have a time element on the agreement that the city made, because this has sat really fallow for too long. And we love this building. It's a special building. And I appreciate that the council member brought up landmark status, because I too don't think it's appropriate to mandate, and I wasn't involved with motion, but beyond doing it for the neighborhood, we need to do it for the city and for this community. This is a really special building, and it has a ton of potential as both a neighborhood gathering spot, but a community gathering place, so close to our core and so close to parks and open space that this community uses and loves. And as you've said, for too long, windows were broken, things have fallen apart, the neighborhood's been really concerned. Updates were done, but then they just sat. And so protecting it through this process is important. And then I'd really encourage you to look at the steps necessary to get that landmark status for this really special building for our community. And then I want to say the neighborhood that I appreciate, and from Preservation Idaho, hearing that there was a sense of solution possible, and hearing some of the concerns, having some solutions proposed, whether or not they're accepted, I appreciated hearing them, and that you brought them tonight so we could think about how we make sure that we protect this building, recognizing that this is a parcel next to it, but really ultimately connected, so that we're able to protect the building while we're doing this. And also appreciate, while I didn't talk to this developer, there are others that were interested in this site, and everyone that had reached out to me, I just said, talk to the neighborhood, because there has been a long history of interest in this building. It's tied both to the neighborhood and important to the city, but because it sat unused and boarded up for too long. And so look forward to not only seeing families and others that are living nearby, but ultimately, importantly, to the neighborhood activity center in coordination and really in collaboration with the neighborhood and the community at large, that our special armory can become. So thanks, everybody. And with that, clerk, will you call the roll?
Phillips,
Yes.
Whittings,
Yes.
Bajent,
No.
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton,
Yes.
4 in favor, 1 opposed, motion carries.
Thanks. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we'll be back for the last item. So with this last appeal of it's PUD 2247, excuse me, and CBA 2226. We will hear first from Jesse Lyle, welcome, for the City of Boise staff, then the appellant, the Liberty Park Neighborhood Association, and then the applicant, Jennifer McDougal, excuse me, Watt. Then I've got 2 people signed up. If there are more of you here to speak and you didn't sign up, I'll just have you come up at the end, then you can write your name on the paper after you talk. And we'll see if anybody's online, and then we'll hear the rebuttals. So with that, Jesse, go ahead and start.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and council members. The item before you is the appeal of the Planning and Zoning Commission's approval of PUD 2247 and CBA 2226. At the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting on December 5th, 2022, the commission approved the applicant's request for a planned residential development comprised of 201 multifamily units located at 6160 Denton Street in an LOD DA zone. A height exception and variance to encroach into the side setback were also included. The applicant is proposing to provide housing at rates between 30 and 80% AMI and wishes to utilize the housing bonus ordinance to increase the density and height, as well as utilizing a 15% parking reduction. The housing bonus ordinance does not limit density, allows for a height increase from 45 to 55 feet, and allows for up to a 20% parking reduction. The building proposed has a primary parapet at 55 feet, and the applicant is requesting a height exception to 61 feet to accommodate elevator and mechanical equipment. This height exception allows for an additional 50 units on the top floor as well. Comments and testimony were received in both support and opposition to the project, primarily concerning density, parking and traffic, privacy and height of building, and access to transit and services. During the deliberation, the commission found that the proposed development met the standards outlined in the HPO and as well as the findings for the PUD and variance. On December 15th, 2022, an appeal was received from the Liberty Park Neighborhood Association. The 4 grounds of appeal are provided on the screen, but generally consist of opposition to the height, massing, density, and traffic concerns. The appellant did not submit any additional memorandum. The commission found that the base height of the building was allowed through the HPO, and the proposed height exception would allow for the modulation and the mechanical equipment and did not substantially modify the look and mass of the building. They also found the variance on the west side of the property provided for an exceptional circumstance in that there is a platted unbuildable common lot between the proposed development and the juvenile detention center that provides for a larger setback than required by the development code. The applicant is not proposing a change in zoning, and the increase in density is allowed through the HPO, as is the parking reduction. This project has been reviewed by all agencies, including ACHD, and this development is near transit and dedicated bike lanes, and also approximately 1 mile from the nearest grocery store. Finally, the project is subject to design review, where a detailed analysis of the massing, landscaping, and general building design will be conducted. In conclusion, the planning team recommends the council deny the appeal and uphold the commission's original decision to approve the PUD and variance, as there is no evidence to suggest the commission erred in its decision, and I will be happy to answer questions.
Any questions for staff?
Madam Mayor?
Yep.
Quick question. As I look at the design, the parking facing the south is not screened at all, and the existing residential is to the south. Wonder if there was ever a discussion about that.
Madam Mayor, council members, the parking is all, well, primarily internal to the site. There are 17 spaces that are outside the site, but those would be on the east side.
So you misunderstood. Sorry, the inside, the parking garage, which is obviously in the building, but there's only mesh screening between the garage and the neighborhood to the south. On the east face, there's windows because that's where the common space and some of those other uses are. I just wondered if you ever talked about trying to provide some kind of screening on the south so that headlights, for instance, from people parking in the garage don't end up shining in the windows of the people across the street.
Madam Mayor, council members, no, that was not discussed as a part of this application, but that's something that can be further looked at through the design review process.
Thank you.
Anything further? All right, thank you. Now we'll hear from the applicant. Sorry, the appellant.
Hi, I'm Christy Perky, Liberty Park Neighborhood Association. My address 6566 West Denton Street in Boise. I'm not as polished as everybody that we've heard tonight, so please be patient with me. I just wanted to say we do have this appeal because we do think that the needs of the building, the people that are going to be living there, and the needs of the neighborhood are not going to be met. So this is the site that it's located on. And you can see those buildings are not 5.5 stories tall. This is from looking from the Juvenile Detention Center. And the property is right next to the Juvenile Detention Center. And again, those buildings are not 5.5 feet tall or 5.5 stories tall. It's my bad. So as a neighborhood, we don't feel that it fits into the way that the neighborhood is already. And we don't have any problems with new people coming in and renting. Most of the properties in our neighborhood, 80% of them are rented by people. Only 20% of us own our property. So, and we already have affordable housing in our neighborhood now. A lot of those apartment complexes have affordable housing, subsidized housing. So there's no opposition to that type of property being developed at all. But from the Hawkins website, this property used to be West Junior High. My kids went to West Junior High. Most of us remember when the school closed and then the property was going to be sold. What was it going to be? Hawkins actually took over that property, and their description that they still have on their website now says that the site adjacent to St. Alphonsus Regional Medical Center and multiple medical suites. It's within approximately 2 miles of the Boise Town Square Mall, Edwards, and downtown Boise and Boise State University. So it says pad, retail, hotel, office, medical professional. And this is also from their website. That lower section on the left says office. Do you want me to wait? I hate when that happens. So, but that's what we've seen. That's what we've been told. There was, actually I have minutes if you want them. There was 3 planning and zoning commissions meetings. One was July 6, 2009, one from March 9th, 2009, and actually, and one from February 9th, 2009. So, and we remember this conversation, and I guess that's why we're frustrated. It's not that we're angry or that it's just we're frustrated. This says, this is a question for staff. One of the things you write in the staff report is that without requirements in the development agreement for a certain ratio of commercial and office to residential, you assume that it will develop only with office uses. This is a 2-part question. The first part is one of the options available to the commission tonight to make recommendation for changes in the development agreement. And if so, do you have any recommendations on something council would support with regard to some kind of ratio? It is a certain number of lots. Is it a certain number of percentage of land? If you can flesh that out a bit for us, that would be appreciated. That was Commissioner Stevens. Josh Johnson replied, it is within the commissioner's discretion to recommend changes to the development agreement. As far as that ratio, I wouldn't want to guess without meeting with the applicant and discussing that with him. I would just be throwing out a wild guess at this point. Commissioner Stevens then said, this is another 2-part of question to the applicant. Would that be something that you would be comfortable with, putting some specifics in the development agreement regarding a ratio of that type, or something that would provide for a specific mix of uses? If so, do you have any thoughts on how we might go about that? And the reply was, if I could clarify the question by Commissioner Stevens, when we talked with the applicant about this very issue, we agreed the assisted living would fulfill the residential portion of that. That is present in this concept. I think we need to clarify that statement. The LO zone itself is appropriate with that policy because it does allow all uses cited as examples under the comprehensive plan policy. For example, residential, hotel, convalescent homes, tech support, neighborhood community shopping centers, biomed labs, pharmacies, limited in and out patient use. That was the applicant, Brian Huffiger. I think that's where we got frustrated, because we all remember this conversation where we were told that there was not going to be any more residential besides the assisted living that is already there. The Cascadia is an assisted living housing unit. So now we're going from being, and we were told at the time, 1 to 2 story buildings. As you could see, that's what the rest of the buildings are in that area. And now we're going to over a 5-story building, which we don't think that we have the infrastructure in our area to support that building. We are very passionate about our neighborhood. Everybody in our neighborhood is part of our community. We're very diverse. We want everybody to be included, but we want everybody, the people moving in and the people that live there already, to be able to have a successful life and enjoy their life. Now, one of the things that we did want to talk about, because I understand that it's only errors in the zoning that we can really discuss today. And our concern, because of the impact to not only the residences that live across the street, but also the juvenile detention center that is right next to the property, and the impact to theirs being a success. The Idaho Code 18-3302 stipulates that a building could be no closer than 500 feet away from a prison. The juvenile detention center is a prison. It's a prison for people under the age of majority. We are concerned also about the privacy of not only the youth that live at the juvenile detention center, but also their families that may come and visit. And we think that if there's a building that's 5 stories tall, looking down on a recreation area of a juvenile detention center, that is not going to be conducive to them becoming successful adults. Now, one of the things that they talked about is, just to let you know what the area looks like from an aerial point of view, Cascadia is in the red with the red circle. That's the assisted living. The white circle is where the property is that we're discussing. And that building right next to that is the juvenile detention center. So I guess in conclusion, that's the things that we're worried about. Impact to the people living there, that we are not able to support this structure, and that the impact to the youth that are in the juvenile detention center, as well as the people that live across the street. And that we just want everybody that moves into our property, into our neighborhood, to have a good and healthy, happy, enjoyable life in the city of Boise. Do you have any questions for me?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think you're going to have a couple questions. Yeah. And you did great. Thanks for being here tonight. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for coming. I certainly remember the very first time I testified here, and it's not a lot of fun. So you did wonderful.
Thank you.
You really, I think, stated your case very well. So I appreciate the concerns you brought up. A question I have, I was also here in 2009 when this property was rezoned, and my memory of those conversations is not that residential would be limited, but that in fact, the council was encouraging that more of this site be residential, because it seems like such a good opportunity to get residential near the hospital, where workers need housing to be able to work at the hospital, near so many other things, the mall, it's such a central site. And so I guess I appreciate the quotes that you brought forward, but wonder, my memory of those hearings overall is that there was a lot of conversation that the site could indeed have more residential.
Can I respond to that? Is it okay?
A question for you to comment back.
And so if you look at our whole neighborhood as a whole, and I told you that about 80% of it is rental, there are no rental buildings. I live in a townhouse. It's a 2-story house. There's most of the apartments are 1 or 2 stories. We have a mobile home park in our neighborhood. There was just a new development on the other side of the neighborhood, and it's 2-story townhouses. We have one apartment complex. It's rather large, and it has some mostly 2-story buildings, but it does have some 3-story buildings. So if this whole thing would have been, hey, we're putting in 2 or 3-story buildings that are apartment complexes, we wouldn't be here. And it's not something, because we agree there needs to be more affordable housing. We agree that, apartments would fit in our neighborhood. It's the 5 stories that's intimidating. And I think it's not like the others. It's not the same as the neighborhood. I watched a couple of other planning and zoning meetings, and people were complaining about having 2-story buildings, townhouses. I'm thinking, bring those over, because that would work. So
thank you. I appreciate that. So it's primarily the scale that is intimidating.
It is intimidating. It's going to be intimidating for the people that live there. They've lived there. You're going to hear from one of them later. I think he's lived there 30 years and not had to look out his front door and have somebody looking at him in his yard. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, I do feel for him, because I wouldn't want that. I wouldn't want a 5-story building across the street from me. Luckily, I have a 2-story building across the street. So, but things can happen. And I know that that Boise needs more housing, and we're okay with more buildings being created. But as close as it is to the juvenile detention center, and I'm not sure that it's 500 feet from the property line, because they were talking about using a variance and getting closer to that property line, that's a concern too.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I think we've got a couple more.
Madam Mayor, first of all, thanks for coming. I love your neighborhood. Liberty Park is one of my favorite parks.
Visit anytime.
Yeah, and you've got a great community garden there. You do have a lot of goat heads. And
That's where we get them every year.
I've got a photo of the mayor with the largest wall of goat heads I've
Had them 50 years ago too.
Taller than me.
So we're trying. My question for you, and I think you said something earlier that is important, and that was the LO zone that you and your neighbors envision that being office or smaller commercial and not residential. So this wasn't necessarily predictable as far as what the development was going to come forward. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I know that during the meeting with the planning and zoning, we were told that we should have been more involved when codes were created, when codes were put in place. And, when the code was put in place, this was what we were told. We were never told there was going to be this large of a building.
Yep. I appreciate that answer. We had another application a while ago, and there was some confusion about limited office and residential being allowed there. And it doesn't surprise me that that was unpredictable to you all. And I think that's important to note. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll call you back up at the end for your final remarks. And now we'll hear from whoever is representing the applicant team.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, Heath Clark, 251 East Front Street in Boise, representing the applicant. I'm going to be working with Shellen today and split the time with her. And I just have a couple of introductory remarks, and then I'll let Shellen do the heavy lifting. And my comments are pretty straightforward. Of course, this is an appeal from the P&Z. P&Z, we all are familiar with those P&Z members. We know that they are folks that have a recognized expertise. Our code actually says, points to that fact, and that's why they're there. As a result, the council gives due consideration to what P&Z did and only finds error on very narrow grounds. And you folks are very familiar with that, but it's the typical standards that you see with dealing with substantial evidence in the record or arbitrary and capricious, those types of things. So the question is, what did P&Z see in this application? What did they consider? What were the standards that they looked at? This is property that has been zoned LO since 2008. Or 2000, I was hearing 2009. I think the staff report says 2008. This is property that is taking advantage of a city program with the housing bonus ordinance. In other words, the policy debates are long behind us. We're at the implementation phase at this point. And when we're at the implementation phase, we look at whether the project implements the code appropriately and whether the Planning and Zoning Commission had a basis for their decision. And in this case, we think that clearly was the case. This is within the four corners, as it were, of the housing bonus ordinance. And the requests that were made for the height exception and for the variance both had a basis in the record that Planning and Zoning evaluated, and there are facts in the record to justify each of those decisions. So with that, I think what I'd like to do is turn the time over to Shellen and then just let her kind of make sure that council has a good feel for the application overall, and then both of us would be happy to answer any questions.
Madam Mayor and council members, my name is Shellen Rodriguez with SMR Development. My address is 520 West Idaho here in Boise. I'm representing the development team, which includes both the Pacific companies and Hawkins. We've got, and then the GGLO is the architect. We've got reps from those companies here today. And first of all, I want to thank Jessie for the hard work that she's done, that staff has done. And I want to thank the neighborhood for coming out. It's a discussion that is hard, and it's a discussion that's an important one to have. We disagree, but I think we disagree for good reason. I spent not only the required neighborhood meeting that was required as part of the CUP application, but I also went to Liberty Park and went to the neighborhood association meeting, and everybody was great and super friendly, but they were not interested in seeing a 5-story building. At the time, they weren't interested in seeing a 3-story building. I develop affordable housing and I work for clients who develop affordable housing, and we have to do that by creating density. You will not get affordability without density. So I say that because I'm passionate about it, but also because change is hard. The neighborhood was clear. We could not meet their needs with being a 2-story development. So that's us. We've TPC with SMR in some degree have developed things like the Ash Street townhomes, permanent workforce housing, not permanent. Adair Manor, New Path, permanent supportive housing, and Hawkins has a long history of doing market rate housing. I believe this is their first dip into truly affordable housing, which I think is one of the most exciting parts about this project, is getting more people at the table who have the wherewithal and are locally, they're here locally as the specific companies, to really get into the game and trying to figure out how we solve this housing crisis for folks that are working at St. Al's. So project history, and I realized I left out like 10 years here. It starts in 2021, which is when the HBO was passed. And I think that was the time when that policy was debated. So we're beyond that. We're well beyond that. TPC and Hawkins entered into an MOU soon after. We started preliminary design agreements so that we could get to the neighborhood meetings and obviously the planning applications, which were submitted in June of this year. We went to planning and zoning first in November, and then again in December because it was a long meeting. And in the meantime, we received the State Workforce Housing Award, which is $4.5 million, I think, I'll double check that, of federal funds that were awarded to the state of Idaho. The state legislature decided to use them for workforce housing. So we're one of about 10 or 12 projects to create just over 1,000 units with that source of funds. And the second round is coming up here in March, but it's a pretty special project. I think it's the only one in Boise that is actually doing what the state legislature wanted it to do. So it's quite an opportunity. Here we are at the appeal. If things move forward, we'd be able to break ground as soon as summer of this year with an 18-month construction period. This is just what I spoke to, which is those 1,000 units that the state legislature wanted to try to create using that $50 million of workforce housing. So this project was funded using that. This is a picture of me on site with members that are here tonight of the neighborhood. And I also just wanted to point out, this is page 10 or something in your very long staff report, but there was a lot of public comment and there was a lot of discussion about the merits of this project, including height, the variance, the parking, all the things. But there was a lot of support. Our neighbors at St. Al's supported it. Our neighbors at St. Al's are having a very difficult time finding janitors that can work and live in Boise, finding low-level nurses and techs, and that's what this housing will provide. So it is change is hard, right? And I looked through I have to stand on my toes to see, but I looked through the housing needs analysis that the staff did a couple of years back, and it was kind of the work prior to the housing bonus. And it just says it straight, is given the scope of the intense housing need in this city, the fact that the housing issue is felt in each neighborhood, it is incumbent on every neighborhood to support the preservation and development of housing in its own backyard. And that is accurate. So I think, in my opinion. Quick perspectives to your point, Councilmember Clegg. This is the interior of the site. And I think that area, I don't know if I have a pointer here, but the area that you're talking about is kind of where the individuals in the picture are. No pointer? Okay, thank you. I should have done that. Definitely should bring a pointer next time. Okay, but you can see the folks, the people in the picture adjacent kind of next to I guess it's the vehicle. The only vehicle that you see in the picture is in front of the parking that Councilmember Clegg was talking about earlier. I just wanted to clarify that. Okay, onward. So thank you. This is the project. It's 193 units of housing. We have rents anywhere from $400 a month to $1,700 a month. That's studios, 1s, 2s, and 3 bedrooms. That serves folks, a 2-person household to a 4-person household, making really roughly anywhere from $21,000 a year up to $70,000 a year. It's a huge spectrum. So as much as I understand that change is hard, I just urge you to not uphold the appeal and consider the discussion that P&Z had. And we can move forward with this project and providing much needed housing. That's it.
Madam Mayor. Shellen, can I ask a quick question? So 2 things. First, all the trees that you're showing around this 5-story building are small, and I don't know if they're being shown small because they're going to be planted small or if that's the ultimate size. But my question is, are you willing? There, it looks to me, as I look at the site plan, that there's plenty of room to plant very big trees. You could plant class 3 trees that would get as tall as this building or relatively near as tall as this building. Even class 2 trees would get up to the 3rd or 4th floor and provide a lot of screening. Have you thought about that?
Madam Mayor, Commissioner Clegg, I think it's a good question. To be honest, there's no streetscape standards in this area. The trees there, I think, were sort of placeholders, artist, architecture kind of license or whatever. But yeah, sure, we can do more screening. Absolutely. More landscaping costs more money. Affordable housing is difficult to build, but absolutely, we can be more thoughtful about the screening to think through, headlights facing somebody's living room as they're trying to watch the news or put the kids to bed. I absolutely get that. And I think that, that is a reasonable thing for us to think through. Can I commit to class 3 trees? Like, I don't really know what that means regarding cost right now. So I'm a little hesitant. But certainly, I think the short answer is absolutely.
And the nice thing about class 3 trees is they don't have to cost more in the beginning. They can cost just the same as the small trees. It's just how big they can grow. So that gets to my second question, which is, would you be willing to put some kind of landscaping screening in front of that mesh on the parking area so that the lights from the cars that are going to park head in at that site don't end up in the eyes of the folks across the street?
Certainly, Madam Mayor and Commissioner Clegg, in your packets, and I think somewhere on the presentation, I don't know if I can get back to it or not, but you can see that through our planning process, we were asked to do just that along what I would call sort of the western edge, which is facing the juvenile detention center. And so you can see that we're doing that on that edge to provide, to make sure that walking path that the association owns maintains pleasant, is pleasant for pedestrians and bicyclists and such. So if the request then or question is to do that along Denton, I think it's certainly something that we could look into.
Thank you.
Other questions? All right, thank you. We'll now hear from members of the public. So I'll start with the 2 people that signed up, and then, sir, you're welcome to come up as well. First, I've got Tammy McMurtry? Okay. All right, and Roger McMurtry. Well, thank you for being here. Appreciate you taking the time. With that, sir, I just need to make sure. I was at the last one. Perfect. You answered my question. Come on up.
I'd like to put something up on the monitor, please.
Do you have a drive or something?
Plot plan.
I don't know if we have anything that can turn that into.
Okay.
I'm sorry, but if you would like, you could pass it up here and we'll just take a look at it.
I was going to say.
What are those things called that we
Pass it
used
down.
used to
Pass
have?
that. Thank you.
Overhead
Elbow.
projectors, yeah. Gosh, I think when I was on Planning and Zoning Commission, we still had overhead projectors.
Madam Mayor.
Yeah, and we'll let the applicants take a look at it too. Sure.
Uh,
Sir, just if you'll talk into the mic, let us know your name and address, and
Okay.
then we'll hear you out.
Christie does a lot better job of speaking than I do. I'm getting old and slow, so bear with me. My name is John Parkson. I live at 6175 West Denton Street. I'm adjacent to the property. Going back through the minutes of the meeting of 2009, I came up with something that I wanted to at least try to describe. The intent of the commission meeting on February 9th, 2009 was not to hodgepodge the space in question. The applicant saw an opportunity for a medical campus, of which Lot 8 is the last to be developed. Characterized as LO development site as 2009, not a residential family, multiple family. The proposed apartment complex will fill the entirety of the perimeter of Lot 8, because the last meeting was about setbacks and the elevation change. They proposed no setbacks and going from 45 to 61 or 62 feet high. The proposed apartment complex will fill the entirety of the Lot 8, the perimeter to perimeter, twice the square footage of what the lot can sustain. That means that by the time they get it built, it will be twice as big as the square footage of the lot, which there's 43,500 square feet to an acre. And this is 2.17 acres. There are 200 covered units that they're assigned. Now, from my understanding, there's supposed to be 1 1/2 spaces per unit outside parking, which this property is basically landlocked in. It has no expansion to the street, no expansion towards juvenile detention center or towards, because it's all been developed. So where does that additional 300 parking spaces come from? Well, they anticipated on the street. Well, the street cannot handle, because of parking. There's some people that park on the street. There's also mailboxes, driveways, fire hydrants, and no parking signs around the cul-de-sac and down at the end of Denton Street. So anyway,
Time.
to
Sir?
maintain the integrity.
You've hit your 3 minutes, but you probably saw I always let everybody give a wrap-up sentence.
Okay, I'm real close. To maintain integrity, we suggest that the medical campus remain according to status quo. We ask the council to honor the established commitment from designated in 2009, proposed by the city commission and the developer.
Thank you.
Very good.
Any questions? Nope. All right, thanks so much. Is anybody else here to testify on this? How about online?
Madam Mayor, we have Patrick Spouts online.
All right, Patrick, welcome.
Thank you. My name is Patrick Spouts. I live at 753 West Sandstone Court, Boise, 83702. I'm calling in to support this project. I think it's a fantastic fit for the area, and it's nice to see true, like actual really low AMI affordable housing get built in the quantities that this is going to bring to our city. A couple hundred people, if this gets built, are going to get to call it home, and I'm really excited about it and hope to see it built soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone further? All right, so we will move into rebuttals. And so the applicant goes first.
Madam Mayor, can I ask a question to staff?
Oh, sure.
First-
Yeah.
Quick question here. So this is a LOD with a development agreement as well, limited office with the design review and development agreement. Can you explain to me how this can be housing instead of office?
Madam Mayor, council members. So the LOD, well, the LO zone does allow for residential development as well. I believe off the top of my head at a density of 43.5 units per acre. However, with the housing bonus ordinance, it still does allow for that residential development, but it modifies that density limit and it gives the developer unlimited density in those areas.
Perfect. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, while staff's there, just a quick question. If it's my understanding, if we deny the appeal and uphold this tonight, the developer will still have to go to design review with final project. Is that correct?
Madam Mayor, council members, that is correct.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, I had
Well,
also a
yep.
question for
Yeah, go ahead.
for staff. Can you speak to the question about the proximity to the prison and what our ordinance says on that?
Madam Mayor, council members, our ordinance does not specifically call out that proximity to the prison. I'm not sure if that was the juvenile detention center. I'm not sure if that is a state statute, but that's not specifically in our development code.
Thank you.
All right, now we'll hear from the applicant. Shellen, is that you or is it Heath? Okay.
Okay. So Madam Mayor, Heath Clark, 251 East Front Street in Boise. So very quickly, just a couple of items. First, with regard to the references back to 2009 and the conversations that occurred back then, the controlling authority is the development agreement. The development agreement calls for a conditional use permit when this property redevelops and a north-south drive aisle, and that has all been satisfied in connection with this application. With regard to the parking reduction was for 15%. That's less than what's allowed under the HBO. And then the last thing that I would just point out is that there was a question about the 500 feet from a prison, and I think the reference was to Idaho Code 18-3302. I looked that up. It doesn't call for that. That's a concealed carry statute. So I'm not sure where that's coming from, and I'm not aware of such a limitation in state code. And I know Shellen had one more clarification.
Madam Mayor and council members, I just wanted to clarify, this project has gone to design review and has been approved. And the design review approval has not been appealed or was not appealed. And it's been the 14 days or the 10 days has passed. I just wanted to clarify. I know that it's a different planner, different department.
Thank you. All right.
Madam Mayor.
Oops, sorry. Did I hear Councilmember Willits?
I had a question. Could you speak to the number of parking spaces quickly? I know you talked about the 15% less, but what's the total number? Can you remind me of that?
Madam Mayor and Councilmember Willits, there's 197 spaces on the property. And to be clear, the property is adjacent to Denton Street, which is a public street. And the other two streets are part of the common area or part of the association, of which 17 spaces are on that sort of drive aisle private street, which is also part of the property.
Thank you.
So 197 plus 17 is what you're saying?
Sorry, 197 total.
Oh, and 17 of those are on the private streets?
Correct.
Okay.
Which is within steps from the front door.
Great, thanks. All right. And now when you're ready, we'll hear from the appellant.
Thank you very much for hearing our appeal. We still don't think there's enough room, especially between the prison or the juvenile detention center. And the building, especially as close as it's getting to the juvenile detention center, they reference that they were, open to the option of adding a different, different foliage for a screening. I don't know that there's enough room to do that with the variance that they're requesting. We still think that the building is not going to be able to be sufficiently supported by our neighborhood. We understand that the code is for any building that contains affordable housing, that they don't have to provide at least one parking space per person. The fact of the matter is that the working poor, which is usually the people that live in affordable housing, have at least one car. Sometimes they have two. So mom and dad both have to work. But regardless, the code says that they don't have to have a place to park. We did have meetings with Shallon SMR and with the neighborhood. There wasn't any support. And, but I do agree that we had those meetings. There was one letter in the from St. Al's saying that they have a lot of people that work for them that are under the poverty line. And that was concerning to me, that our acute care is being taken care of by people that are below the poverty line. But those people already live in our neighborhood and they already are walking to work. So yeah, more housing would probably give them more workers in that area. But regardless, we appreciate that the city of Boise is looking at adding affordable housing. And we appreciate the fact that that we're looking to bring in new people into our community. But as the way the building is set now, we don't really think that it's the best fit for our neighborhood. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Thanks a lot. All right. I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing.
Madam Mayor, I would move that we deny the appeal.
Second.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, thank you. Looking through this discussion, looking through the transcripts at planning and zoning, I feel like this applicant did everything right, everything that we asked them to do. They used bonus ordinances that we put in place for really, really good reasons, and it was really exciting. I did ask a few questions tonight about the LO zone because it's kind of my least favorite zone, but also I really like it. I like it that it gives us this weird amount of flexibility that as the city grows and things change, we can use it in different ways, but it's terribly unpredictable for folks in the neighborhood. And we've had another application where it was a rezone and they were trying to rezone it to LO and we denied it just because of that confusion. And I think that that's something that we have to note going forward, that in order to give people a good predictability of what might happen in their neighborhood, we need to make sure that there's a clear understanding and easy understanding of the zones that are there. One note about this particular development that I think is tremendously exciting, and I know about that area, is that there's going to be some challenges and changes for this neighborhood. And, certainly having a large building next to you, there may be some losses or things that feel like some loss. There's also going to be a whole bunch of kids that are running across the street and playing home run derby in that park next door. That's exactly what I would have been doing at their age. And there's going to be some really cool things that make that neighborhood kind of come alive. And it really is missing a lot of residents in that area. There's a lot of kind of weird office space and commercial. And this really has a huge opportunity to make that a really fun and vibrant neighborhood and really make that park come alive. And we do need to do some work in continuing to pull goat heads over there so those kids don't get flat tires. But I really do think that this will be an asset to that neighborhood. And I think that we do owe it to our neighbors to really look at some of these zoning codes that are just a little bit confusing when we're doing our zoning code rewrite.
Madam Mayor. Thank you. I'll be supporting this motion. Councilmember Halliburton is right. This developer did everything we asked of them. In addition, it's the first use of the Affordable Housing Fund in the city of Boise. I think it's a tremendously good use. And I'll comment on the LO zone. We're rezoning, we're writing a new zoning code and the LO zone's going away. We're going to have mixed use zone, which is going to be a lot more clear what the possibilities could be. I was part of hours of discussion with the school district and then the original purchaser of this property to do a true mixed use center on this property. It is so close to the hospital. It's so close to the geographic center of the city, and having housing here is such a, I think, appropriate place, appropriate use. Understand that scale is quite a big jump and a lot different. Remembering a time in my own neighborhood when a building of much bigger scale than anything else was proposed and went all the way to district court and was ultimately built. And I would tell you that today everyone in the neighborhood loves it because it really was the kind of housing that people needed. I can't, because it doesn't need to go to design review, ask the developer to be bound to add larger trees or landscaping on the south side, but I would implore them to look at that. The landscape strip is big enough on that south side to add bigger trees, and putting some landscaping screening in front of those MASH parking spaces would go a long way, I think, to softening the impact of the building on the housing across the street. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, I'll be supporting the motion, but I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. You live in such a unique neighborhood because it's in between one of our largest employers, healthcare systems, and then you have this very beautiful little older neighborhood where you all live. And this is a point of transition where this denser housing is going. And in other areas of the city, points of transition often have a little more density, a little more height than what you'll see in a residential area, because you're right in between that commercial and the residential. And whenever I drive down Emerald now, I'm like, these big parking lots are such a missed opportunity. And we're built at a time when, maybe that wasn't a missed opportunity. Land prices were different and everything was just different back then. But now we're dealing with the land prices that we have today. They're much different than they were in 2009 when this was originally envisioned. So we need density so that we can build affordability. And I hope that this development turns out to not be a detriment to your neighborhood, much as developments in Councilmember Clegg's neighborhood have actually enhanced the neighborhood. We just approved or didn't deny another development in my neighborhood that I hope is really great and adds vibrancy. And sometimes being able to welcome new neighbors ends up being better for everyone. So I'm going to be supporting the motion, and I look forward to those big trees. Elaine.
I won't be voting, but I just wanted to say a couple things. I appreciate everybody being here tonight. And I want to thank the Neighborhood Association, Christy and team, and the neighbors that came, because I heard a couple things tonight that we don't often hear. And that is when somebody's opposing a development proposal. And that is that you welcome new neighbors. And I really appreciate your neighborhood. I've enjoyed the events that I've attended at the park. I love that park. Like picking goat heads, although I don't really like picking goat heads, but it's fun at the park. And in the garden, it just really hurts. But I've walked so many of the streets right around and throughout your neighborhood. And what I love about your neighborhood is how often you're coming and going between single family homes and apartments. And you reference that, and as we think about as a city, the importance of ensuring that everyone has a home and a home that they can afford at Boise budgets, the city's taken steps to help make that a reality. the housing bonus ordinance is one of those things used tonight. And that helps it. That's why it lets it be taller than you might have imagined. The Affordable Housing Trust Fund that we advocated for at the state makes it possible and have a grant here. And then I also think about, but I heard the intimidation that you mentioned when you think about a bigger building than what you've had, because you do have 2- and 3-story apartment buildings throughout your community. But I imagine a lot of those individuals that are walking over to St. Alice to work, kiddos, like you said, that'll be running to the park that, have a safe walk to a park in less than 10 minutes. And honestly, great neighbors in all of you and your neighbors when folks start to move into this place. So I just appreciate your neighborhood and the way you have done in many ways what that quote reference was, like, realize that there's room for housing in the neighborhood that you lead, but appreciate the impact that change has in advance, and hope, as the council president does, that when this is said and done, that you end up finding that same flow with the folks that live here that you do with so many of the others throughout your neighborhood, and for which I thank you. And to the developer, thanks for taking advantage of the ordinances we've tried to pass to make real on our, deep desire to ensure that residents in Boise can find homes that they afford. And congratulations on being awarded from the State Housing Trust Fund. That's really a big deal. We'd like to see more in the city. We'd like to see more funds in that trust fund, but so glad that this one qualified and that you've worked through the process. So thank you. Clerk, will you call the roll?
Willetts.
Yes.
Whittings.
Yes.
Bajent.
Yes.
Clegg.
Yes.
Halliburton.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Madam Mayor, before we adjourn, could I just make one comment?
Yeah.
I also went to West Junior High many years ago, and I walked around this area a lot. The end of this little cul-de-sac is connected with dirt to the park. And it seems like a perfect opportunity for our Parks Department to think about formalizing the path to the park from this development as it goes forward.
I'd ask Jesse if she'd just make note of that and take that back to Parks. And because we already closed the hearing, I can't take anything more from the public, but please share your thoughts once we've adjourned. And with that, I'll take a motion.
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All in
Aye.
favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thanks, everybody. Night, Lucy.